Amid the misty jungles and winding rivers of southern Mexico, a mysterious civilization emerged, blazing brightly before fading into legend. They were the Olmec, the mother culture of Mesoamerica, the ancestors who laid the foundation for all great civilizations that followed. In the fertile floodplains where earth and sky seemed to meet, human hands shaped wonders from mud and stone, and thus began the very first chapter of ancient America's story. The emergence of the Olmec civilization in the tropical lowlands of south-central Mexico represents one of the most significant cultural developments in the ancient Americas. This transformation occurred within a geographic region encompassing the modern Mexican states of Veracruz and Tabasco, where the convergence of environmental advantages and human innovation created the conditions for Mesoamerica's first complex society. The heartland of Olmec civilization stretched across approximately 18,000 square kilometers of coastal plains and river valleys, bounded by the Gulf of Mexico to the north and the Tuxtla Mountains to the south. This region, characterized by its low-lying terrain rarely exceeding 50 meters above sea level, provided an ideal setting for early agricultural experimentation and settlement. The landscape consisted of meandering rivers, extensive wetlands, natural levees, and seasonal floodplains that would prove instrumental in supporting dense populations. The Quetzalcoatl River system served as the primary geographic spine of early Olmec development, with its tributaries creating a network of waterways that facilitated both transportation and agricultural productivity. The Tenala River to the west and the Grijalva River system to the east formed additional corridors of settlement and cultural exchange. These rivers deposited nutrient-rich sediments across the coastal plains during annual flood cycles, creating some of the most fertile agricultural land in Mesoamerica. Archaeological investigations have revealed that the environmental advantages of this region extended far beyond fertile soils. The tropical climate, with its consistent temperatures averaging 28 degrees Celsius and annual rainfall exceeding 1,200 millimeters, supported year-round agricultural production. The region's diverse ecosystems included tropical rainforests, freshwater marshes, mangrove swamps, and coastal lagoons, each providing distinct resources that early inhabitants could exploit. The alluvial soils of the river valleys contained high concentrations of volcanic ash from the nearby Tuxtla Mountains, creating exceptionally fertile growing conditions. These soils, known locally as vertisols, retained moisture effectively while providing excellent drainage during heavy rains. The natural levees formed by river deposits created elevated areas suitable for permanent settlement, while the adjacent floodplains offered ideal conditions for cultivating maize, beans, and squash. The abundance of water resources in the region cannot be overstated in understanding early Olmec development. Beyond the major river systems, numerous springs, streams, and seasonal water bodies provided reliable freshwater access throughout the year. The extensive wetland areas supported diverse wildlife populations, including deer, peccaries, jaguars, birds, fish, and shellfish, creating a protein-rich environment that could sustain growing human populations. The transition from hunter-gatherer societies to complex sedentary communities in the Olmec heartland occurred gradually over several centuries. Archaeological evidence from sites such as San Lorenzo, which would later become the first major Olmec center, indicates that permanent settlements began appearing around 1500 BC. These early communities consisted of small clusters of pole and thatch houses constructed on raised platforms to protect against seasonal flooding. Excavations at San Lorenzo have uncovered evidence of increasingly sophisticated settlement patterns during this formative period. The earliest occupation layers reveal simple domestic structures associated with basic ceramic traditions and stone tool assemblages typical of late Archaic period societies. However, by 1400 BC, archaeological deposits show clear evidence of population growth, architectural elaboration, and the emergence of craft specialization. The ceramic assemblages from early Olmec sites demonstrate remarkable innovation in both technology and artistic expression. The characteristic Olmec pottery styles, including the distinctive white-rimmed black ceramics and elaborate figurines, first appeared during this period. These ceramics show sophisticated understanding of firing techniques, clay preparation, and decorative applications that would become hallmarks of Olmec material culture. Stone tool technology also underwent significant transformation during the early Olmec period. While earlier populations had relied primarily on locally available materials, Olmec artisans began importing high-quality stone from distant sources. Obsidian from highland Mexican sources, jade from the Mozegua Valley in Guatemala, and basalt from the Tuxtla Mountains became increasingly common in archaeological deposits, indicating the development of long-distance trade networks. The establishment of permanent agricultural systems represented perhaps the most crucial development in early Olmec society. Archaeological evidence suggests that maize cultivation became increasingly important after 1400 BC, supplemented by beans, squash, chili peppers, and various root crops. The fertile floodplains allowed for intensive agricultural production that could support population densities far exceeding those possible with hunting and gathering alone. Agricultural terracing and water management systems appeared early in Olmec development, demonstrating sophisticated understanding of hydraulic engineering. Raised fields, known as chinempes, were constructed in wetland areas to maximize agricultural productivity while providing protection against flooding. These systems required coordinated labor efforts and technical expertise that suggest emerging social hierarchies and specialized knowledge. The development of monumental architecture began during this early period, though it would reach its full expression in later centuries. Initial construction projects at San Lorenzo included the modification of natural hills to create artificial plateaus suitable for ceremonial and elite residential purposes. These earthworks required thousands of cubic meters of fill dirt, indicating the ability to mobilize substantial labor forces for public construction projects. The emergence of artistic traditions that would define Olmec civilization also began during this formative period. The earliest colossal stone heads, though dating to slightly later periods, represent the culmination of artistic and technical traditions that began developing around 1300 BC. Smaller-scale sculptures, including jade figurines and ceremonial axes, demonstrate the sophisticated aesthetic sensibilities and technical skills that characterized Olmec craftsmanship. Religious and ceremonial practices became increasingly complex during the early Olmec period, as evidenced by specialized architectural features and ritual deposits. Ceremonial platforms, ball courts, and elaborate burial practices appeared in archaeological contexts, suggesting the development of organized religious systems that would influence subsequent Mesoamerican civilizations. The question of Olmec influence on later Mesoamerican cultures, often referred to as the mother culture hypothesis, has generated considerable scholarly debate. Archaeological evidence clearly demonstrates that many fundamental elements of Mesoamerican civilization first appeared in Olmec contexts. These include the Mesoamerican calendar system, hieroglyphic writing, the ritual ball game, and distinctive artistic motifs such as the Wajagwa complex. However, recent archaeological discoveries have complicated the simple narrative of Olmec cultural primacy. Contemporary developments in other regions of Mesoamerica, including the Oaxaca Valley and the Maya lowlands, suggest that cultural complexity emerged simultaneously across multiple areas. Rather than a single mother culture, current scholarship increasingly views early Mesoamerican development as a process of regional interaction and mutual influence. The Olmec contribution to this broader pattern of cultural development remains substantial and distinctive. The scale of Olmec monumental architecture, the sophistication of their artistic traditions, and the extent of their trade networks exceeded contemporary developments in other regions. The Olmec heartland served as a crucial node in emerging pan-Mesoamerican interaction networks that would shape cultural development across the region for millennia. Trade relationships established during the early Olmec period created connections spanning vast distances across Mesoamerica. Olmec artifacts have been discovered in contexts ranging from highland Mexico to the Pacific coast of Guatemala, indicating the far-reaching influence of Olmec commercial and cultural networks. These connections facilitated the spread of technological innovations, artistic styles, and religious concepts that would become fundamental to Mesoamerican civilization. The social organization of early Olmec society shows clear evidence of increasing stratification and specialization. Elite residences, distinguished by their elevated positions, elaborate construction, and associated luxury goods, appeared alongside more modest domestic structures. Craft specialists, including potters, stoneworkers, and jade carvers, developed distinct workshop areas and production techniques that required years of training and experience. The transformation of San Lorenzo from a modest settlement into Mesoamerica's first major urban center represents a watershed moment in the development of complex society in the Americas. Between 1200 and 900 BC, this site evolved into a sprawling ceremonial and political complex covering approximately 700 hectares, demonstrating unprecedented levels of social organization, technological achievement, and artistic sophistication that would establish the template for urban development throughout ancient Mesoamerica. The strategic location of San Lorenzo on a natural plateau rising 50 meters above the surrounding floodplains provided both defensive advantages and symbolic significance for its inhabitants. This elevated position commanded expansive views across the Coatzacoalcos River Valley, while offering protection from seasonal flooding that regularly inundated the surrounding lowlands. The natural topography, however, proved insufficient for the ambitious construction projects envisioned by Olmec planners, leading to one of the most remarkable engineering achievements in early American history. Archaeological investigations have revealed that Olmec engineers undertook massive earth-moving operations to transform the San Lorenzo Plateau into a suitable foundation for monumental architecture. Teams of workers transported an estimated 200,000 cubic meters of filled dirt to create artificial terraces, platforms, and courtyards across the site. This construction required the coordinated efforts of thousands of laborers working under centralized direction, indicating the emergence of sophisticated administrative systems capable of organizing large-scale public works projects. The modified plateau featured a complex arrangement of ceremonial plazas, elite residential compounds, and specialized workshop areas connected by stone-paved causeways and drainage channels. The main ceremonial precinct occupied the highest portion of the plateau, featuring a series of stepped platforms arranged around rectangular courtyards. These platforms, constructed from carefully fitted stone blocks and earth fill, reached heights of up to 15 meters and provided foundations for wooden temples and elite residences that have not survived in the archaeological record. The urban planning at San Lorenzo demonstrated remarkable sophistication in its integration of functional and symbolic elements. The site's designers created a series of interconnected spaces that channeled movement through the complex while emphasizing hierarchical relationships between different areas. Broad causeways linked major ceremonial precincts, while narrower pathways provided access to residential and workshop areas. The careful attention to sightlines and spatial relationships suggests that the layout served both practical and ritualistic purposes. Among the most extraordinary achievements of San Lorenzo's inhabitants was the creation of the colossal basalt heads that have become synonymous with Olmec civilization. These massive sculptures, ranging from 1.5 to 3.4 meters in height and weighing between 6 and 50 tons, represent some of the finest examples of monumental sculpture produced in the ancient Americas. 17 colossal heads have been discovered at San Lorenzo, each displaying distinctive facial features, elaborate headdresses, and remarkable artistic sophistication that demonstrates the technical mastery of Olmec stone carvers. The creation of these monumental sculptures required extraordinary logistical coordination and technical expertise. The basalt used for the heads originated in the Cerro Sintepec quarries in the Tuxtla Mountains, located approximately 60 kilometers northwest of San Lorenzo. The transportation of these massive stone blocks across difficult terrain represents one of the most impressive technological achievements of the ancient world. Archaeological investigations at the quarry sites have revealed evidence of sophisticated extraction techniques, including the use of wooden wedges, stone hammers, and controlled heating to split basalt boulders along natural fracture lines. The journey from quarry to San Lorenzo involved navigating dense tropical forests, crossing numerous rivers and traversing swampy lowlands that would have presented formidable obstacles to ancient transport teams. Recent experimental archaeology suggests that the basalt blocks were likely moved using a combination of wooden rollers, rope systems, and human labor forces numbering in the hundreds. The logistics of feeding and coordinating such large work crews over extended periods required administrative capabilities that speak to the organizational sophistication of San Lorenzo's rulers. Each colossal head displays unique facial characteristics that suggest they represent specific individuals rather than generic royal portraits. The distinctive headdresses worn by the sculptured figures feature complex arrangements of bands, knots, and decorative elements that likely indicated rank, affiliation, or ceremonial role. Some heads display ear ornaments, while others show evidence of deliberate mutilation or recarving, possibly reflecting changes in political power or ritual requirements. The technical execution of the colossal heads demonstrates remarkable artistic achievement in working with one of the hardest stones available to ancient sculptors. Basalt's density and durability made it extremely difficult to carve using the stone and wooden tools available to Olmec artisans. The smooth surfaces, precise proportions, and intricate details achieved in required years of patient work by master craftsmen who had developed specialized techniques for working this challenging material. The positioning of the colossal heads within the San Lorenzo complex appears to have followed deliberate patterns related to ceremonial and political functions. Several heads were placed at strategic locations along the site's main causeways, where they would have been visible to visitors approaching the ceremonial center. Others were positioned within elite residential compounds, possibly serving as symbols of authority or ancestral presence. The careful placement of these monuments suggests they played important roles in the ritual and political life of the community. The social stratification evident at San Lorenzo during this period reflects the emergence of complex hierarchical relationships that would characterize Mesoamerican civilizations for centuries to come. Archaeological evidence reveals distinct residential areas corresponding to different social classes, with elite compounds occupying the most prominent locations on the artificial plateau while commoner households clustered around the site's periphery. Elite residences at San Lorenzo featured sophisticated architectural elements that distinguished them from ordinary domestic structures. These compounds typically included multiple buildings arranged around private courtyards, with the main structures elevated on stone platforms and featuring elaborate drainage systems. The buildings themselves were constructed using superior materials and techniques, including carefully dressed stone foundations, thick walls capable of supporting upper stories, and sophisticated roof systems designed to channel rainwater away from living areas. The interior arrangements of elite residences included specialized spaces for different activities, including formal reception areas, private family quarters, storage facilities, and workshops for luxury craft production. Excavations have revealed elaborate floor systems, featuring multiple layers of clay, sand, and stone designed to provide insulation and drainage. Some elite structures included raised sleeping platforms, built-in storage benches, and decorative wall treatments using colored clays and organic pigments. The differential treatment evident in Olmec burial practices provides additional evidence for complex social stratification at San Lorenzo. Elite burials featured elaborate grave goods, including jade ornaments, ceramic vessels, obsidian tools, and imported materials from distant regions. These interments were often placed within specially constructed tomb chambers beneath residential platforms, while commoner burials typically consisted of simple pit graves with minimal grave goods. The most elaborate burials discovered at San Lorenzo included individuals interred with complete jade regalia, including ear ornaments, necklaces, bracelets, and ceremonial axes. The jade used in these ornaments originated in the Moquer Valley of Guatemala, over 1,000 kilometers from San Lorenzo, indicating the existence of extensive trade networks and the ability of elite individuals to command valuable resources from distant sources. Specialized craft production at San Lorenzo reached unprecedented levels of sophistication during this period, with evidence for workshops dedicated to pottery manufacture, stone tool production, jade carving, and textile creation. These workshops were typically located in distinct areas of the site and showed evidence for standardized production techniques and quality control measures that suggest centralized oversight of craft activities. The pottery workshops at San Lorenzo produced distinctive ceramic styles that became hallmarks of Olmec material culture. These included the characteristic white-rimmed black vessels, elaborate figurines depicting supernatural beings and elite individuals, and specialized ceremonial vessels featuring complex iconographic programs. The technical quality of these ceramics required sophisticated understanding of clay preparation, firing techniques, and decorative applications that could only be achieved through years of specialized training. Stone tool workshops at San Lorenzo processed imported raw materials, including obsidian from highland Mexican sources and chert from regional deposits. The production sequences evident in these workshops demonstrate highly organized manufacturing processes designed to maximize efficiency and minimize waste. Specialized tools for different functions were produced according to standardized patterns that ensured consistent quality and performance. The hydraulic engineering achievements at San Lorenzo represent some of the most sophisticated water management systems developed in the ancient Americas. The site's engineers created an elaborate network of stone-lined drains, underground conduits, and surface channels designed to manage the heavy rainfall characteristic of the tropical lowland environment. These systems not only prevented flooding and erosion, but also provided controlled water supplies for domestic and ceremonial purposes. The drainage system at San Lorenzo included over 170 individual features, ranging from simple surface channels to elaborate underground conduits constructed from carefully fitted basalt block. The main drainage lines followed the natural slope of the artificial plateau while incorporating sophisticated engineering features such as settling basins, flow regulators, and maintenance access points. The system's designers demonstrated remarkable understanding of hydraulic principles, creating gradients and flow patterns that efficiently moved water while preventing erosion and structural damage. The construction of these drainage systems required precise surveying and engineering calculations to ensure proper water flow across the complex topography of the modified plateau. Archaeological investigations have revealed evidence for sophisticated measuring techniques and quality control procedures that ensure the system's components functioned effectively as an integrated network. The durability of these installations, many of which remained functional for centuries, testifies to the engineering expertise of their creators. The technological capabilities demonstrated at San Lorenzo extended beyond hydraulic engineering to include sophisticated understanding of material science, structural engineering, and environmental management. The successful transformation of a natural hill into a stable platform for monumental architecture required detailed knowledge of soil mechanics, drainage principles, and construction techniques that would not be matched elsewhere in Mesoamerica for several centuries. The sophisticated engineering achievements and monumental architecture of San Lorenzo provided the physical framework for an equally complex spiritual world that would define Olmec civilization and profoundly influence subsequent Mesoamerican traditions. The archaeological record reveals a rich tapestry of supernatural beliefs centered around transformation, the natural world, and the intermediary role of ritual specialists who bridged the gap between human and divine realms. The distinctive Olmec artistic style that emerged during the height of San Lorenzo's power featured recurring motifs of supernatural beings that combined human and jaguar characteristics in ways that reflected fundamental beliefs about transformation and spiritual power. These were jaguar figures, as archaeologists have termed them, appeared across multiple media including stone sculpture, jade ornaments, ceramic vessels, and architectural decoration. The consistency of these representations across different contexts and time periods indicates they held central importance in Olmec religious thought. Archaeological investigations at San Lorenzo have uncovered numerous examples of wer-jaguar imagery in both monumental and portable art forms. Stone monuments designated as Monuments 52 and 58 display carved figures with distinctly feline facial features including prominent canine teeth, flared nostrils, and downturned mouths that create snarling expressions. These figures typically possess human bodies and postures while maintaining the powerful jaw structure and facial characteristics associated with jaguars. The combination creates an unsettling visual effect that suggests beings existing between human and animal states. The technical execution of these supernatural figures demonstrates sophisticated understanding of anatomical proportion and symbolic representation. Olmec artists achieved remarkable consistency in depicting specific wer-jaguar characteristics across different scales and materials. The distinctive downturned mouth, often described as a flame eyebrow design above the eyes, and the characteristic cleft head or fontanelle depression appear repeatedly in sculptures ranging from massive stone altars to tiny jade pendants measuring only a few centimeters in length. The symbolic significance of jaguar transformation in Olmec religious thought appears closely connected to beliefs about spiritual power and elite authority. Jaguars represented the apex predators of the Mesoamerican tropical forest environment, possessing strength, stealth, and nocturnal hunting abilities that inspired both fear and respect among human populations. The association of rulers and religious specialists with jaguar characteristics suggested their possession of supernatural powers that enabled them to move between different realms of existence. Archaeological evidence from San Lorenzo includes numerous jade figurines depicting infant-like beings with pronounced war-jaguar features. These baby-faced figurines, crafted from the finest quality jade available to Olmec artisans, display the characteristic cleft heads, snarling mouths, and feline facial features in miniaturized form. The infantile body proportions combined with the supernatural facial characteristics create a distinctive iconographic type that appears to represent divine beings or transformed humans in their most powerful state. The creation of these jade figurines required extraordinary technical skill and access to rare materials that originated hundreds of kilometers from the Olmec heartland. The jade sources in the Motagua Valley of Guatemala provided the blue-green stone that Olmec artisans prized above all other materials for creating sacred objects. The hardness of jade made it extremely difficult to work using the stone and wooden tools available to ancient craftsmen, requiring patient grinding and polishing techniques that could take months to complete a single figurine. The iconographic program evident in Olmec art extends beyond war-jaguar imagery to include representations of other supernatural beings and natural forces that played important roles in their spiritual worldview. Serpent imagery appears frequently in Olmec art, often combined with human or jaguar elements to create composite beings that embodied multiple sources of power. These feathered serpent motifs would later become central to Mesoamerican religious traditions, suggesting the Olmec origin of this fundamental symbolic complex. Bird imagery also featured prominently in Olmec supernatural iconography, particularly representations of harpy eagles and other large raptors that dominated the forest canopy. These powerful birds, capable of taking prey as large as monkeys and sloths, represented aerial dominance and the ability to move between earthly and celestial realms. Olmec artists frequently depicted human figures wearing elaborate feathered costumes or headdresses that transformed them into bird-like beings. The archaeological record at San Lorenzo includes evidence for sophisticated understanding of astronomical phenomena and their integration into religious belief systems. Certain architectural alignments at the site correspond to significant solar and stellar events, suggesting that Olmec religious specialists possessed detailed knowledge of celestial cycles. The careful orientation of major ceremonial structures indicates that astronomical observations played important roles in determining the timing of religious ceremonies and political events. Monument 19 at San Lorenzo provides one of the clearest examples of early Mesoamerican calendrical notation, featuring a series of carved glyphs that appear to record specific dates according to a sophisticated counting system. The monument displays a bar and dot numerical notation that would become standard throughout Mesoamerican civilizations, suggesting that the Olmec developed fundamental mathematical and calendrical concepts that influenced later cultures across the region. The ritual practices evidenced through archaeological finds at San Lorenzo reveal a complex ceremonial life that involved bloodletting offerings and elaborate caching ceremonies designed to maintain cosmic balance and ensure continued prosperity. Excavations have uncovered numerous caches containing carefully arranged assemblages of jade objects, ceramic vessels, and stone tools that were deliberately buried beneath architectural features, or in specially prepared pits. Cache 7 at San Lorenzo contained an extraordinary assemblage of jade and serpentine objects, including 16 figurines, 6 ceremonial axes, and numerous beads and ornaments arranged in a specific pattern that suggests ritual significance. The figurines were positioned to face a central axis, with the largest and most elaborate pieces occupying positions of apparent prominence within the arrangement. The deliberate burial of these valuable objects indicates that they served ceremonial purposes rather than simply representing wealth accumulation. The bloodletting implements discovered in archaeological contexts at San Lorenzo include obsidian blades, stingray spines, and specially designed ceramic vessels that appear to have been used for collecting and containing blood offerings. These artifacts provide direct evidence for ritual practices that involved the deliberate shedding of blood as offerings to supernatural forces. The technical sophistication of these implements, particularly the obsidian blades with their razor-sharp edges, demonstrates specialized knowledge of tool production for religious purposes. Stingray spines recovered from San Lorenzo contexts show evidence of careful preparation and modification for use as bloodletting instruments. These marine products obtained from Gulf Coast waters were shaped and sharpened to create effective piercing tools that could penetrate skin and flesh with minimal trauma. The presence of these implements in inland sites demonstrates the importance of bloodletting rituals in Olmec religious practice and the extensive trade networks required to obtain appropriate materials. The role of shamanism and elite religious specialists in Olmec society becomes evident through analysis of burial practices, architectural features, and artifact distributions that suggest specialized religious knowledge and practices. Certain elite burials at San Lorenzo included individuals interred with distinctive assemblages of ritual paraphernalia, including jade ornaments, bloodletting implements, and exotic materials that indicate their specialized roles as intermediaries between human and supernatural realms. The architectural evidence for specialized religious activities at San Lorenzo includes features that appear designed for restricted access and private ceremonial functions. Small chambers and platforms associated with elite residential compounds show evidence for activities involving fire, incense burning, and the manipulation of ritual objects in controlled settings. These spaces contrast sharply with the large public plazas that accommodated community-wide ceremonies, suggesting a hierarchy of religious practices that corresponded to social stratification. Archaeological investigations have revealed evidence suggesting the ritual use of various psychoactive substances in Olmec religious contexts. Ceramic vessels with distinctive forms and decorative programs appear designed for preparing and consuming liquid substances, possibly including fermented beverages or plant-based preparations that induced altered states of consciousness. The iconography associated with these vessels often includes supernatural imagery that suggests their use in religious rather than secular contexts. The discovery of specialized grinding stones and preparation implements in elite contexts at San Lorenzo provides additional evidence for the processing of organic materials that may have included psychoactive plants. These tools show distinctive wear patterns and residue traces that suggest use for preparing specific types of plant materials rather than ordinary food processing. The restricted distribution of these implements indicates that access to certain substances was controlled by elite religious specialists. The influence of Olmec religious iconography and practices on later Mesoamerican cultures remains a subject of considerable scholarly debate, though the archaeological evidence clearly demonstrates the early development of fundamental concepts that would persist for millennia. The Huarjagua complex, calendrical systems, bloodletting rituals, and shamanic practices that characterized Olmec religion all appear in modified forms among later Maya, Zapotec, and Central Mexican civilizations. The transmission of these religious concepts occurred through the extensive trade networks that connected the Olmec heartland with distant regions across Mesoamerica. Olmec-style artifacts and iconographic motifs have been discovered in contexts ranging from highland Mexican sites to Pacific coast settlements, indicating the far-reaching influence of Olmec religious ideas. However, the process of cultural transmission involved adaptation and modification rather than simple adoption, as local populations integrated Olmec concepts with existing traditions. The ceramic evidence from San Lorenzo includes vessels that appear specifically designed for ritual use, featuring elaborate iconographic programs and specialized forms that distinguish them from ordinary domestic pottery. These ceremonial vessels often display complex supernatural imagery, including Huarjagua motifs, serpent designs, and human figures in ritual poses or costumes. The technical quality of these pieces, with their sophisticated surface treatments and precise decorative execution, indicates they were produced by specialist craftsmen for religious purposes. The ritual caching practices evident at San Lorenzo established patterns that would continue throughout Mesoamerican civilizations for over 2 millennia. The careful arrangement of objects within these caches, the selection of specific materials and forms, and the precise positioning relative to architectural features all suggest codified ritual procedures that were transmitted across generations of religious practitioners. These practices served to sanctify architectural spaces, commemorate important events, and maintain spiritual relationships with supernatural forces. The evidence for water-related rituals at San Lorenzo includes specialized drainage features that appear to have served ceremonial as well as practical functions. Certain stone-lined channels and basins show evidence for activities involving the controlled flow and collection of water, possibly for purification rituals or offerings to water-associated deities. The integration of these features into the site's overall hydraulic system demonstrates the interconnection between practical engineering and religious symbolism in Olmec architectural planning. The decline of San Lorenzo around 900 BC marked a pivotal transition in Olmec civilization, as political and ceremonial authority shifted eastward to La Venta, a site that would surpass its predecessor in architectural innovation and religious complexity. Located on an island in the coastal swamps of Tabasco, approximately 15 kilometers inland from the Gulf of Mexico, La Venta occupied a strategic position that controlled access to both riverine and maritime trade routes, while providing natural defensive advantages in the challenging wetland environment. The geographic setting of La Venta presented unique opportunities and constraints that shaped its development into Mesoamerica's sophisticated ceremonial center of the first millennium BC. The site occupied a natural island measuring roughly 5.2 square kilometers, surrounded by seasonally flooded marshlands that created a natural moat protecting the settlement from land-based attacks. The Tonala River system provided multiple navigable channels that connected La Venta to both interior highland regions and coastal trade networks, making it an ideal location for controlling commercial exchange across vast distances. Archaeological investigations have revealed that La Venta's inhabitants undertook massive landscape modification projects that transformed the natural island into an elaborate ceremonial complex featuring precisely aligned architectural groups, artificial reservoirs, and sophisticated drainage systems. The scale of these earthworks exceeded even the impressive modifications at San Lorenzo, involving the movement of an estimated 800,000 cubic meters of earth and stone to create the platforms, plazas, and causeways that define the site's ceremonial core. The architectural centerpiece of La Venta was the extraordinary fluted pyramid known as Complex C, a structure that represented one of the earliest and most distinctive pyramid forms in Mesoamerican architecture. Rising approximately 34 meters above the surrounding plaza level, this conical earthen mound featured 10 alternating ridges and furrows that created a fluted appearance unique among Mesoamerican monumental architecture. The pyramid's base diameter measured 128 meters, making it one of the largest structures built in Mesoamerica during the first millennium BC. The construction techniques employed in building the fluted pyramid demonstrate remarkable engineering sophistication adapted to the challenging environmental conditions of the coastal wetlands. The builders created a stable foundation by driving thousands of wooden piles deep into the underlying clay deposits, then constructed the pyramid using alternating layers of different colored clays that provided both structural integrity and symbolic significance. The distinctive fluting was achieved through careful placement of clay fills and the construction of internal drainage channels that prevented water accumulation and structural failure. Recent archaeological investigations using ground-penetrating radar and core sampling have revealed that the fluted pyramid contained multiple construction phases, with the final form representing the culmination of several centuries of building activity. The earliest construction phase appears to date to approximately 800 BC, with major additions and modifications continuing until around 400 BC. Each construction episode involved the careful placement of offerings and ritual deposits that sanctified the structure and maintained its spiritual power. The ceremonial complex at La Venta extended far beyond the central pyramid to include an elaborate arrangement of platforms, plazas, and specialized structures that created one of the most sophisticated architectural ensembles in the ancient Americas. Complex A, located north of the fluted pyramid, featured a rectangular plaza measuring 150 by 200 meters, surrounded by low platforms that supported wooden temples and elite residences. The plaza's carefully leveled surface was constructed using multiple layers of colored clays and sands that created a mosaic pattern visible from the surrounding elevated structures. The architectural planning at La Venta demonstrated unprecedented attention to astronomical alignments and sacred geometry that reflected sophisticated understanding of celestial phenomena and their religious significance. The site's main axis followed a precise north-south orientation that aligned with significant stellar events, while secondary alignments corresponded to solar and lunar cycles that determined the timing of important ceremonies. The mathematical precision evident in these alignments required detailed astronomical observations and complex calculations that indicate the presence of specialized priest astronomers within Olmec society. Complex B at La Venta featured a series of stepped platforms arranged around a sunken courtyard that served as the setting for elaborate ritual performances and public ceremonies. The platforms were constructed using carefully dressed stone blocks weighing up to several tons each, transported from quarries located over 100 kilometers away in the Tuxtla Mountains. The precision of the stone cutting and fitting techniques employed in these structures rivaled the masonry achievements of much later Mesoamerican civilizations. The discovery of Tomb A within Complex A revealed one of the most elaborate burial complexes ever found in Olmec contexts, providing unprecedented insights into elite mortuary practices and religious beliefs. The tomb consisted of a rectangular chamber measuring 7 by 4 meters, constructed from massive basalt columns that supported a roof of stone slabs weighing over 20 tons. The chamber walls were lined with carefully fitted stone blocks and covered with layers of colored clay that created elaborate geometric patterns. The burial assemblage within Tomb A included the remains of multiple individuals accompanied by extraordinary grave goods that demonstrated the wealth and power of La Venta's elite class. The primary burial featured an individual interred with a complete jade regalia, including an elaborate mosaic mask composed of over 200 individual jade pieces that had been carefully shaped and fitted together to create a supernatural face with jaguar characteristics. The technical precision required to create this mask represents one of the finest achievements of ancient American lapidary arts. Additional grave goods in Tomb A included jade ear ornaments, necklaces, bracelets, and ceremonial axes that displayed the characteristic Olmec blue-green jade, prized above all other materials. The jade assemblage represented materials from multiple sources across Mesoamerica, including the Motagua Valley of Guatemala, the Sierra de las Minas, and possibly sources in Costa Rica, indicating the vast geographic scope of La Venta's trade networks and the ability of its rulers to command exotic materials from distant regions. The ceramic vessels accompanying the burials in Tomb A included examples of the finest Olmec pottery ever discovered, featuring elaborate iconographic programs that depicted supernatural beings, ritual scenes, and complex mythological narratives. One extraordinary vessel displayed a continuous frieze showing human figures in elaborate costumes performing what appears to be a ritual dance or ceremony. The figures wore distinctive headdresses featuring feathered serpent motifs and carried ritual implements including bloodletting tools and incense burners. The serpentine pavements discovered at La Venta represent another unique architectural feature that demonstrates the site's importance as a ceremonial center. These elaborate mosaic floors, constructed from thousands of carefully shaped serpentine blocks arranged in geometric patterns, covered areas of up to 200 square meters within the ceremonial precincts. The serpentine, a green metamorphic rock obtained from sources in the Tuxtla Mountains, was selected for both its aesthetic qualities and its symbolic associations with water and fertility. The most famous serpentine pavement at La Venta featured an abstract jaguar mask design measuring 4.5 by 6 meters, composed of approximately 485 individual serpentine blocks that had been precisely cut and fitted together. The design incorporated the characteristic with jaguar facial features, including the distinctive cleft head, snarling mouth, and flame eyebrow motifs that appeared throughout Olmec art. The pavement was carefully buried beneath layers of colored clay immediately after its completion, suggesting it served ritual rather than practical functions. Archaeological investigations have revealed evidence for sophisticated workshops at La Venta that produced luxury goods for both local consumption and long-distance trade. These specialized production areas included facilities for jade carving, obsidian tool manufacture, ceramic production, and the creation of elaborate textiles using imported cotton and exotic feathers. The technical sophistication evident in these workshops indicates the presence of master craftsmen who had undergone years of specialized training to achieve the skill levels necessary for producing objects of the quality found at La Venta. The jade working areas at La Venta contained evidence for the complete production sequence from raw material processing to finished ornament creation. Archaeological deposits included jade debitage, partially completed objects, and specialized tools used for cutting, drilling, and polishing operations. The presence of jade materials from multiple geographic sources indicates that La Venta served as a major processing center, where raw materials from distant regions were transformed into finished goods for redistribution throughout Mesoamerica. The obsidian workshops at La Venta processed volcanic glass from sources located over 1,000 kilometers away in highland Mexico, including the famous Pachuca source that produced distinctive green obsidian prized throughout Mesoamerica. The technical expertise evident in the blade production sequences demonstrates sophisticated understanding of fracture mechanics and knapping techniques that enable the creation of tools with razor-sharp edges, suitable for both practical and ceremonial purposes. The discovery of magnetite mirrors at La Venta provides evidence for one of the most sophisticated technological achievements of ancient Mesoamerica. These polished iron oxide mirrors, created by grinding and polishing magnetite nodules obtained from sources in Oaxaca and Guatemala, produced reflective surfaces of remarkable clarity that served both practical and ritual functions. The technical challenges involved in creating these mirrors required specialized knowledge of mineral properties and polishing techniques that represented closely guarded craft secrets. The ritual deposits discovered throughout La Venta reveal the complexity of ceremonial practices that sanctified the site and maintained its spiritual power. These carefully arranged offerings included massive caches containing hundreds of jade objects, ceramic vessels, obsidian tools, and exotic materials, arranged according to specific patterns that reflected religious beliefs and cosmological concepts. The largest cache contained over 1,000 individual objects representing materials from across Mesoamerica, indicating the vast resources that La Venta's rulers could mobilize for religious purposes. Offering for at La Venta contained an extraordinary assemblage of 16 jade and serpentine figurines, arranged to depict what appears to be a ritual scene or mythological narrative. The figurines, ranging in height from 16 to 19 centimeters, were positioned in a semicircle facing a group of 6 jade celts that had been arranged vertically to create a symbolic forest or sacred grove. The precise positioning of these objects and their careful burial beneath layers of colored sand indicate they served important ceremonial functions related to site dedication or renewal rituals. The evidence for long-distance trade networks centered at La Venta demonstrates the site's role as a major commercial hub that connected diverse regions of Mesoamerica through exchange relationships involving both luxury goods and basic commodities. Archaeological investigations have identified materials originating from sources spanning central Mexico to lower Central America, including jade from Guatemala, obsidian from highland Mexican sources, amber from Chiapas, and marine shells from both Pacific and Atlantic coasts. The trade relationships evidenced through material remains at La Venta involved complex exchange mechanisms that went beyond simple commercial transactions to include diplomatic relationships, religious obligations, and political alliances that bound distant communities together through networks of reciprocal obligation. The presence of La Venta-style artifacts in sites across Mesoamerica indicates that these trade relationships facilitated the spread of Olmec religious concepts, artistic styles, and technological innovations across vast geographic distances. The hydraulic engineering achievements at La Venta rivaled those of San Lorenzo, while adapting to the unique challenges of the wetland environment. The site's engineers created an elaborate system of canals, reservoirs, and drainage channels that managed water flow across the ceremonial complex while providing controlled access to fresh water for both practical and ritual purposes. The system included sophisticated features such as stone-lined settling basins, overflow channels, and maintenance access points that ensured reliable operation despite the challenging environmental conditions. The ceremonial ball court at La Venta represents one of the earliest examples of this distinctive Mesoamerican architectural form that would become central to religious and political life throughout the region. The court featured the characteristic eye-shaped playing field with sloping walls and end zones, constructed using carefully fitted stone blocks and finished with smooth plaster surfaces. Archaeological investigations have revealed evidence for elaborate dedication ceremonies that involved the burial of jade offerings and other precious objects beneath the quartz playing surface. The transformation of raw basalt into the colossal heads and monumental sculptures that defined Olmec civilization required technological mastery that exceeded anything previously achieved in Mesoamerica. The quarrying operations in the Tuxtla Mountains represented industrial-scale extraction activities that involved hundreds of workers using sophisticated techniques to split massive boulders from the volcanic bedrock. Archaeological investigations at the Cerro Sintepec quarries have revealed evidence for systematic exploitation of specific basalt flows that possessed the fine-grained texture and structural integrity necessary for monumental sculpture. The basalt extraction process began with careful geological surveys to identify suitable stone deposits that combined workability with durability. Olmec quarrymen developed techniques for reading the natural fracture patterns within basalt flows, allowing them to predict how large blocks would break when subjected to controlled stresses. The quarrying teams used wooden wedges driven into natural cracks, then soaked with water to create expansion forces that could split enormous boulders along predetermined lines. Archaeological evidence includes hundreds of wedge holes, stone hammers weighing up to 15 kilograms, and fire-cracked rocks that indicate the use of thermal shock techniques to weaken resistant stone. The selection criteria for basalt blocks, destined for colossal head production, required extraordinary precision in estimating the final sculpture's proportions, while the stone remained in rough form at the quarry site. Master sculptors possessed the ability to visualize the finished monument within irregular basalt boulders, accounting for internal flaws, color variations, and structural weaknesses that could compromise the carving process. This level of expertise required decades of training and experience that could only be acquired through apprenticeship systems that transmitted technical knowledge across generations of specialized craftsmen. The transportation of these massive stone blocks from the Tuxtla Mountains to Olmec ceremonial centers presented logistical challenges that required unprecedented organizational capabilities and engineering innovation. The colossal heads at San Lorenzo, weighing between 6 and 50 tons, had to traverse approximately 60 kilometers of difficult terrain that included dense tropical forests, steep ravines, seasonal swamps, and multiple river crossings. The successful completion of these transport operations demonstrates the ability of Olmec rulers to mobilize enormous labor forces for extended periods, while providing the food, tools, and organizational structure necessary for such complex undertakings. Recent experimental archaeology projects have provided insights into the probable methods used for moving these massive sculptures across the challenging landscape of the Gulf Coast lowlands. The most effective technique involved constructing temporary roadways using wooden planks laid over log foundations, creating stable surfaces capable of supporting the tremendous weights involved. Teams of 200 to 400 workers could move blocks weighing 20 tons using wooden rollers, rope systems, and coordinated pulling efforts that advanced the sculptures approximately 2 to 3 kilometers per day under optimal conditions. The river crossings presented particularly complex engineering challenges that required the construction of temporary bridges or floating platforms capable of supporting multi-ton loads. Archaeological evidence from several sites includes massive wooden posts driven into riverbanks and stone anchoring systems that suggest the use of pontoon bridges constructed from multiple canoes lashed together with wooden platforms. These river transport systems required precise calculations of buoyancy, load distribution, and structural stability that demonstrates sophisticated understanding of hydraulic engineering principles. The final positioning of colossal heads within ceremonial centers involved additional logistical operations that required earth-moving equipment, ramps, and lever systems to place the sculptures in their designated locations. Archaeological investigations at San Lorenzo have revealed evidence for elaborate ramp systems constructed from earth and stone that allowed work crews to raise multi-ton sculptures to elevated platform surfaces. The precision achieved in positioning these monuments, often within centimeters of predetermined alignments, indicates the use of surveying techniques and measuring systems that ensured accurate placement according to architectural and astronomical requirements. The carving techniques employed in creating the colossal heads demonstrate mastery of stone-working methods that produced remarkably sophisticated artistic results using only stone and wooden tools. The smooth, curved surfaces that characterize these sculptures required patient grinding and polishing operations using abrasive stones of varying textures, from coarse volcanic rock for initial shaping to fine-grained sandstones for final surface treatments. The technical challenges involved in achieving uniform surface textures across sculptures, measuring over 3 meters in height, required systematic approaches to tool management, work scheduling, and quality control that speak to highly organized workshop systems. The facial features carved into the colossal heads display anatomical precision that suggests the sculptors worked from specific models or possessed detailed knowledge of individual physiognomy. Each head displays unique characteristics in eye shape, nose configuration, lip thickness, and facial proportions that create distinctive portraits rather than generic representations. The technical execution of these details required specialized carving tools capable of creating precise cuts in extremely hard stone, including chisels made from jade and other tough materials that could maintain sharp edges through extended use. The elaborate headdresses depicted on the colossal heads represent some of the most complex sculptural achievements in ancient American art, featuring intricate arrangements of bands, knots, tassels, and decorative elements that required extraordinary technical precision to execute in stone. These headdresses display consistent iconographic elements that appear to indicate specific ranks, offices, or ceremonial roles within Olmec society. The technical challenges involved in carving these complex three-dimensional forms, with their undercuts, projecting elements, and fine details, demonstrate the sculptor's complete mastery of their medium and tools. The cultural significance of jade in Olmec civilization extended far beyond its aesthetic appeal to encompass fundamental religious and political concepts that shaped elite identity and social organization. The blue-green color of high-quality jade held symbolic associations with water, vegetation, and fertility that connected this precious stone to the cosmic forces governing agricultural productivity and human reproduction. The rarity and difficulty of working jade made it ideal for creating objects that embodied the supernatural power and exclusive status of Olmec rulers and religious specialists. Archaeological evidence reveals that jade held preeminent status among all materials available to Olmec craftsmen, valued even above gold, which was readily available in regional placer deposits. The preference for jade reflects specific cultural values that associated the stone's color, hardness, and acoustic properties with supernatural forces and divine beings. When struck, high-quality jade produces a distinctive ringing tone that Olmec religious specialists interpreted as the voice of supernatural beings, making jade objects essential components of ritual performances and ceremonial regalia. The sources of jade used by Olmec craftsmen were located hundreds of kilometers from the Gulf Coast heartland, primarily in the Matagua Valley of Guatemala, where geological conditions created deposits of jadeite, the hardest and most prized variety of jade. Additional sources in the Sierra de las Minas and possibly in Costa Rica provided alternative materials with slightly different colors and working properties. The control of these distant jade sources required diplomatic relationships, military alliances, or direct territorial control that demonstrates the far-reaching political influence of major Olmec centers. The technical challenges involved in working jade using Stone Age technology required specialized knowledge and techniques that were closely guarded craft secrets, passed down through generations of master carvers. Jade's extreme hardness, rating 6.5 to 7 on the Mohs scale, made it nearly impossible to cut or shape using ordinary stone tools. Olmec jade workers developed sophisticated techniques using abrasive slurries containing crushed quartz and garnet that could slowly grind away jade surfaces when applied with wooden tools and bamboo saws. The drilling of holes for suspension or decoration required hollow reed drills charged with abrasive compounds, rotating continuously for hours to penetrate the resistant stone. The production sequence for jade objects involved multiple stages of cutting, shaping, drilling, and polishing that could require months of patient work to complete a single ornament. The initial blocking out of rough forms used string saws charged with abrasive compounds to cut through raw jade nodules, followed by grinding operations using progressively finer abrasives to achieve the desired shapes. The final polishing stages employed organic compounds including crushed bamboo charcoal and plant-based oils that created the lustrous surfaces that made finished jade objects appear to glow with inner light. The iconographic programs displayed on jade objects reveal sophisticated artistic traditions that encoded complex religious and political messages within their decorative elements. Jade ceremonial axes, among the most common jade objects found in Olmec contexts, typically feature jaguar faces with the characteristic cleft heads, snarling mouths, and flame eyebrow motifs that identify them as supernatural beings. The technical precision required to carve these intricate details in jade demonstrates the extraordinary skill levels achieved by Olmec craftsmen and the importance placed on creating objects worthy of divine beings. The jade masks discovered in elite burials at La Venta and other major centers represent the pinnacle of Olmec lapidary arts, combining technical virtuosity with profound religious symbolism. These masks, constructed from hundreds of individually shaped jade pieces fitted together to create supernatural faces, required years of planning and execution by teams of master craftsmen. The largest mask from La Venta to make consisted of over 200 separate jade elements that had been precisely cut and drilled to fit together without gaps or irregularities, creating a seamless surface that transformed the wearer into a supernatural being. The smaller-scale artistic achievements of Olmec craftsmen extended across multiple media and demonstrated consistent aesthetic principles that unified their material culture, despite the diversity of raw materials and functional requirements. Ceramic figurines ranging from tiny pendants to life-size sculptures displayed the same attention to anatomical detail and supernatural iconography that characterized monumental stone sculpture. The technical quality of these ceramic works required sophisticated understanding of clay preparation, firing techniques, and surface treatments that produced objects of remarkable durability and aesthetic appeal. The ceramic workshops at major Olmec centers produced distinctive vessel forms that served both practical and ceremonial functions, while displaying iconographic programs that encoded religious and political messages. The characteristic white-rimmed black ceramics achieved their distinctive appearance through carefully controlled firing atmospheres that created reducing conditions in the kiln's upper portions while maintaining oxidizing conditions below. This technique required precise temperature control and timing that could only be achieved through years of experience and specialized knowledge. The ceramic figurine traditions that flourished throughout the Olmec period demonstrate sophisticated modeling techniques that captured both human and supernatural subjects with remarkable fidelity. These figurines, ranging from naturalistic portraits of elite individuals to fantastic representations of were-jaguar beings, required skilled artisans capable of working in 3 dimensions while maintaining consistent proportional relationships and iconographic accuracy. The hollow construction techniques used for larger figurines involved complex assembly procedures that joined separately modeled components into unified compositions without visible seam lines. The obsidian working traditions at Olmec sites produced some of the finest stone tools ever created in Mesoamerica, demonstrating complete mastery of knapping techniques that maximize the utility of this valuable imported material. The prismatic blade technology that characterized Olmec obsidian workshops required specialized core preparation techniques and precise striking methods that produced long, narrow blades with razor-sharp edges, suitable for cutting, scraping, and ceremonial bloodletting activities. The consistency achieved in blade production indicates the presence of master knappers who had developed standardized techniques for working obsidian from multiple geological sources. The ceremonial axes that appear throughout Olmec artistic traditions served multiple functions as practical tools, ritual implements, and symbols of authority that connected their owners to supernatural sources of power. These axes, crafted from jade, serpentine, and other precious stones, typically featured elaborate carved decoration that transformed functional tools into sacred objects. The technical challenges involved in creating these objects, particularly the precise drilling required for hafting holes, demonstrate sophisticated understanding of stoneworking techniques and tool design principles. The architectural sculpture that adorned Olmec's ceremonial centers required coordination between stone carvers, architects, and religious specialists to ensure that decorative programs supported the ritual and political functions of these important spaces. The massive altars that dominated ceremonial plazas featured complex iconographic scenes that depicted rulers emerging from supernatural caves or engaging with divine beings in elaborate costume. The technical execution of these narrative sculptures required master carvers capable of working on monumental scales while maintaining the fine detail necessary for effective visual communication. The sophisticated stoneworking traditions that defined Olmec artistic achievement depended entirely upon extensive trade networks that connected the Gulf Coast heartland to resource zones spanning the length and breadth of Mesoamerica. These commercial relationships, which began during the early phases of San Lorenzo's development and reached their greatest complexity during La Venta's dominance, established economic patterns that would persist throughout Mesoamerican history, while facilitating the spread of Olmec cultural innovations across vast geographic distances. Archaeological evidence from sites throughout Mexico and Central America reveals the remarkable extent of Olmec trade relationships through the distribution of distinctive artifacts, raw materials, and artistic styles that originated in the Gulf Coast lowlands. Olmec-style ceramic vessels have been discovered in highland Mexican sites over 1,000 kilometers from the nearest major Olmec center, while jade objects carved in characteristic Olmec styles appear in archaeological contexts from the Pacific coast of Guatemala to the central valleys of Mexico. This widespread distribution indicates that Olmec merchants and craftsmen operated within commercial networks that encompassed every major region of Mesoamerica. The obsidian trade represents one of the most clearly documented aspects of Olmec commercial activity, with chemical sourcing studies revealing that volcanic glass from specific Mexican highland sources reached Olmec sites in quantities that far exceeded local consumption needs. The Pachuca obsidian source in central Mexico provided distinctive green volcanic glass that appears in Olmec contexts beginning around 1000 BC, while sources in the Trans-Mexican volcanic belts supplied gray and black obsidian varieties that Olmec knappers transformed into prismatic blades, ceremonial knives, and decorative objects. The scale of obsidian importation at major Olmec centers indicates systematic procurement operations rather than casual exchange relationships. Archaeological investigations at La Venta have recovered over 50,000 obsidian artifacts representing materials from at least 6 different geological sources, with individual workshops containing blade cores that originated from single quarrying episodes at distant sources. This pattern suggests that Olmec merchants maintained regular contact with highland suppliers and possessed the organizational capabilities necessary to coordinate large-scale material transfers across difficult terrain. The jade trade networks that supplied Olmec craftsmen with their most precious raw material extended even further than obsidian procurement operations, reaching into the mountainous regions of Guatemala where geological conditions created the world's finest jadeite deposits. The Motagua Valley, located over 1,000 kilometers southeast of the Olmec heartland, provided the blue-green jade that Olmec artisans prized above all other materials for creating ceremonial objects and elite regalia. The successful exploitation of these distant sources required diplomatic relationships, territorial agreements, or direct political control that demonstrates the far-reaching influence of major Olmec centers. Recent archaeological investigations in the Motagua Valley have revealed evidence for organized jade extraction operations that may have been directly controlled by Olmec interests or operated under agreements that guaranteed regular supplies to Gulf Coast centers. The quarrying sites show evidence for systematic exploitation techniques, standardized tool assemblages, and waste disposal patterns that suggest coordinated production activities rather than opportunistic gathering by local populations. The presence of Olmec-style ceramic sherds and other cultural materials in these contexts indicates direct contact between Olmec specialists and jade source communities. The magnetite trade that supplied Olmec craftsmen with materials for creating polished mirrors involved procurement networks that reached into the highland regions of Oaxaca and Guatemala, where iron oxide deposits provided suitable raw materials. These mirrors, created through patient grinding and polishing of magnetite nodules, served both practical and ritual functions within Olmec society, while demonstrating technological capabilities that would not be matched elsewhere in Mesoamerica for several centuries. The technical knowledge required to identify suitable magnetite deposits and transform them into functional mirrors represents specialized expertise that may have been closely guarded by Olmec craftsmen. Archaeological evidence from Olmec sites includes magnetite mirrors in various stages of production, from roughly shaped blanks to finished objects with highly reflective surfaces capable of producing clear images. The production sequence involved initial shaping using stone hammers and chisels, followed by extended grinding operations, using progressively finer abrasives to achieve smooth, curved surfaces. The final polishing stages employed organic compounds and specialized techniques that created mirrors with reflective qualities comparable to modern glass surfaces. The cacao trade, though more difficult to document archaeologically due to the perishable nature of the commodity, likely played a crucial role in Olmec commercial networks and may represent one of their most significant contributions to Mesoamerican economic development. The tropical lowland environment of the Olmec heartland provided ideal growing conditions for cacao trees, while the beans served as both a luxury consumption item and a standardized medium of exchange that facilitated commercial transactions across diverse cultural and linguistic boundaries. Linguistic evidence suggests that the word cacao derives from Proto-Mixozoic languages spoken in the Olmec heartland, indicating that these populations may have been the first to systematically cultivate and process cacao for human consumption. The development of techniques for fermenting, drying, and preparing cacao beans into consumable beverages required specialized knowledge that Olmec populations could have shared with other Mesoamerican groups through their extensive trade networks. The marine shell trade connected Olmec centers to both Pacific and Atlantic coastal regions, where specialized gathering operations provided raw materials for creating ornaments, tools, and ceremonial objects. Spondylus shells from Pacific waters appear regularly in Olmec archaeological contexts, often carved into elaborate ornaments or ceremonial implements that held special significance in religious rituals. The bright orange and red colors of these shells made them particularly valuable for creating objects associated with fire, blood, and supernatural transformation. Archaeological investigations have revealed evidence for specialized shell-working areas at major Olmec sites where imported marine shells were processed into finished ornaments using sophisticated cutting, drilling, and polishing techniques. These workshops produce standardized ornament types that appear throughout Olmec territory, suggesting centralized production systems that supplied finished goods to communities throughout the Heartland region. The technical expertise evident in these shell ornaments required specialized knowledge of material properties and working techniques that could only be acquired through extended apprenticeship programs. The distribution of Olmec cultural influence beyond the Gulf Coast heartland becomes clearly visible through archaeological evidence from sites where local populations adopted Olmec artistic styles, architectural forms, and religious practices. The site of Calcatzingo in central Mexico provides one of the most dramatic examples of Olmec cultural penetration into distant regions, with monumental relief sculptures that display characteristic Olmec iconographic motifs executed in local stone by craftsmen who had clearly studied Olmec artistic traditions. The relief sculptures at Calcatzingo include Monument 1, which depicts a human figure seated within a stylized cave mouth, decorated with were-jaguar motifs characteristic of Olmec supernatural iconography. The technical execution of this sculpture demonstrates sophisticated understanding of Olmec artistic conventions while adapting them to local materials and cultural contexts. The presence of such elaborate Olmec-style monuments at sites over 500 kilometers from the nearest major Olmec center indicates the far-reaching influence of Olmec religious and artistic traditions. The site of Teopantacuanatlan in Guerrero provides additional evidence for Olmec cultural influence in regions far from the Gulf Coast heartland. The architectural features at this site include sunken courtyards and platform arrangements that closely parallel those found at major Olmec centers, while the associated artifact assemblages contain numerous objects displaying characteristic Olmec stylistic elements. The adoption of these architectural forms by local populations suggests that Olmec urban planning concepts influence community organization across diverse environmental and cultural settings. Archaeological investigations at Teopantacuanatlan have revealed evidence for specialized craft production activities that employ techniques and materials associated with Olmec traditions. Jade working areas contain evidence for the processing of raw materials obtained from the same Guatemalan sources exploited by Olmec craftsmen, while obsidian workshops show evidence for blade production techniques that parallel those developed at major Olmec centers. These technological transfers indicate sustained contact between local populations and Olmec specialists who shared technical knowledge and training. The ceramic traditions at sites influenced by Olmec culture show clear evidence for the adoption of Olmec vessel forms, decorative techniques, and iconographic motifs by local potters who adapted these innovations to local materials and functional requirements. The white-rimmed black ceramics that characterized Olmec pottery production appear in modified forms at sites throughout central and southern Mexico, indicating the of specific firing techniques and aesthetic preferences through trade and cultural contact. The figurine traditions that developed at sites outside the Olmec heartland demonstrate particularly clear evidence for cultural transmission and local adaptation of Olmec artistic concepts. These ceramic sculptures display the characteristic Huarjagua motifs, babyface features, and supernatural iconography that defined Olmec religious art while incorporating local stylistic elements and cultural references that reflect the creative adaptation of foreign concepts to indigenous traditions. The influence of Olmec religious practices on contemporary and later Mesoamerican cultures becomes evident through the widespread distribution of ritual objects, ceremonial architecture, and iconographic motifs that originated in Olmec contexts. The ritual ballgame, which would become central to Mesoamerican religious and political life for over 2 millennia, first appears in archaeological contexts at Olmec sites, where specially constructed courts provided settings for ceremonial competitions that combined athletic skill with religious symbolism. The bloodletting rituals that characterized Olmec religious practices appear to have spread throughout Mesoamerica through cultural contact and religious exchange, with specialized implements and ceremonial contexts appearing at sites far from the Olmec heartland. Stingray spines, obsidian blades, and ceramic vessels designed for collecting blood offerings appear in archaeological contexts throughout Mexico and Central America, indicating the widespread adoption of Olmec ritual practices by diverse cultural groups. The calendrical systems that would become fundamental to Mesoamerican civilization show clear connections to innovations that first appeared in Olmec contexts. The bar and dot numerical notation system, the 260-day ritual calendar, and the long count dating system all have their earliest documented appearances at Olmec sites, suggesting that these populations developed the mathematical and astronomical concepts that would shape Mesoamerican intellectual traditions for centuries to come. The writing systems that emerged throughout Mesoamerica during the late Olmec period show clear stylistic and conceptual connections to earlier Olmec developments, though the extent of direct influence remains a subject of scholarly debate. The earliest hieroglyphic inscriptions from sites such as La Mollera and Tres Zapotes employ iconographic elements and compositional principles that clearly derive from Olmec artistic traditions, while incorporating innovations that suggest independent development of specific writing conventions. The agricultural innovations that characterized Olmec civilization, including raised field systems, water management techniques, and crop processing methods, spread throughout Mesoamerica through trade contacts and population movements that carried technical knowledge to diverse environmental settings. The Chinampas agriculture that would later characterize the Valley of Mexico shows clear connections to raised field systems first developed in the Olmec heartland, while terracing techniques and irrigation methods appear at sites throughout the region during periods of intensive contact with Olmec populations. The social organizational principles that characterized Olmec civilization, including hierarchical political systems, specialized craft production, and monumental construction projects, influenced community development throughout Mesoamerica as local populations adopted and adapted these innovations to their specific cultural and environmental circumstances. The emergence of complex chiefdoms and early state-level societies throughout Mexico and Central America during the late 1st millennium BC shows clear connections to organizational models first developed by Olmec populations. The extent of direct political control exercised by Olmec centers over distant regions remains unclear, though the archaeological evidence suggests that cultural influence operated primarily through trade relationships, religious exchange, and voluntary adoption rather than military conquest or territorial expansion. The adaptation of Olmec innovations to local conditions and cultural preferences indicates that receiving populations maintained considerable autonomy while selectively incorporating foreign elements that enhanced their own cultural and economic development. The decline of major Olmec centers around 400 BC did not end their cultural influence. As the innovations they had developed continued to spread throughout Mesoamerica and provided foundations for the complex civilizations that would dominate the region during subsequent periods. The Maya, Zapotec, and Central Mexican cultures that emerged during the late 1st millennium BC all incorporated elements derived from Olmec traditions, while developing their own distinctive cultural characteristics and regional adaptations. The technological mastery that enabled Olmec civilization to flourish in the challenging environment of the Gulf Coast lowlands emerged from centuries of experimentation and innovation across multiple domains of human activity. While their monumental sculptures and jade ornaments captured the attention of later civilizations, the Olmec achievements in agriculture, symbolic communication, astronomy, and specialized manufacturing provided the foundation for their cultural dominance and lasting influence throughout Mesoamerica. The agricultural innovations developed by Olmec populations represented sophisticated responses to the unique challenges and opportunities presented by their tropical lowland environment. The seasonal flooding that characterized the river valleys of Veracruz and Tabasco created both obstacles and advantages for early farmers who needed to protect their crops from inundation while taking advantage of the fertile alluvial soils deposited by annual flood cycles. Archaeological investigations have revealed evidence for elaborate raised field systems that transformed wetland areas into highly productive agricultural landscapes capable of supporting dense populations year-round. The raised field complexes, known locally as camelins, consisted of elevated planting surfaces separated by drainage canals that served multiple functions within the agricultural system. These fields, measuring typically 10 to 30 meters in width and extending for hundreds of meters through wetland areas, were constructed by excavating parallel canals and using the extracted soil to build raised platforms that remained above flood levels during the wettest seasons. The canals provided controlled drainage during heavy rains while retaining moisture during dry periods, creating optimal growing conditions for maize, beans, squash, and other staple crops. Archaeological evidence from raised field sites near San Lorenzo and La Venta indicates that these systems supported agricultural productivity levels that far exceeded what could be achieved through slash-and-burn techniques employed in upland areas. Soil samples from ancient field surfaces contain elevated levels of organic matter, phosphorus, and other nutrients that accumulated through centuries of careful management practices, including the application of canal muck, organic waste, and possibly human waste as fertilizers. The sustainability of these systems over extended periods demonstrates sophisticated understanding of soil chemistry and nutrient cycling that enabled continuous cultivation without degrading the productive capacity of the land. The construction and maintenance of raised field systems required coordinated labor efforts that involved entire communities in activities ranging from initial excavation to ongoing canal maintenance and field reconstruction. Archaeological investigations have revealed evidence for standardized construction techniques and systematic maintenance schedules that suggest centralized planning and oversight of agricultural operations. The scale of these systems, covering hundreds of hectares around major Olmec centers, indicates that agricultural management represented a major focus of political authority and administrative capability. Canal construction projects undertaken by Olmec engineers created transportation and communication networks that connected agricultural areas to ceremonial centers, while providing controlled water supplies for both practical and ritual purposes. These artificial waterways, some extending for several kilometers through swampy terrain, required sophisticated surveying techniques to ensure proper gradients and flow patterns that would prevent stagnation and siltation. Archaeological investigations have revealed evidence for stone-lined canal sections, wooden lock systems, and elaborate drainage controls that managed water flow throughout complex hydraulic networks. The engineering challenges involved in canal construction through unstable wetland soils required innovative solutions that demonstrated sophisticated understanding of soil mechanics and hydraulic principles. Olmec engineers developed techniques for stabilizing canal banks using wooden pilings, stone reinforcements, and woven mat systems that prevented erosion and collapse during flood periods. The successful operation of these systems over centuries indicates that maintenance protocols were established and followed consistently by communities that depended on these waterways for transportation and agricultural productivity. Crop diversification strategies employed by Olmec farmers included the cultivation of numerous plant species that provided both dietary variety and risk management against environmental uncertainties. Archaeological evidence from middens and storage facilities indicates that Olmec populations cultivated at least 20 different crop species, including multiple varieties of maize, beans, squash, chili peppers, cotton, cacao, and various root crops adapted to wetland conditions. This agricultural diversity provided nutritional security while reducing vulnerability to crop failures that could devastate communities dependent on single staple foods. The processing techniques developed for different crops required specialized knowledge and equipment that enabled Olmec populations to maximize the nutritional and economic value of their agricultural production. Maize processing involved elaborate procedures for removing kernels from cobs, grinding grain into flour using stone methods, and preparing mixed tumuliste corn through treatment with lime that improved both nutritional content and storage properties. Archaeological evidence includes numerous grinding stones, storage vessels, and processing facilities that indicate the scale and sophistication of food preparation activities. The development of early symbolic systems within Olmec culture represents one of their most significant intellectual achievements, though the extent to which these systems constituted true writing remains a subject of considerable scholarly debate. Archaeological investigations have revealed numerous examples of carved glyphs, painted symbols, and incised marks on monuments, pottery, and portable objects that suggest systematic approaches to visual communication extending beyond simple decorative or artistic functions. The glyphic elements found on Olmec monuments display consistent formal characteristics and recurring combinations that indicate systematic rules governing their use and meaning. Monument 13 at La Venta features a series of carved symbols that include bar and dot numerals, distinctive head variants, and abstract geometric forms arranged in linear sequences that suggest narrative or calendrical content. The consistency of these elements across multiple monuments and sites indicates that they functioned as components of a standardized symbolic system rather than random decorative motifs. The relationship between Olmec symbolic systems and later Mesoamerican writing traditions remains complex and controversial, with some scholars arguing for direct continuity, while others emphasize independent development of writing in different regions. The iconographic elements that appear in Olmec contexts clearly influence later artistic traditions, but the extent to which specific symbolic conventions were transmitted and maintained across cultural and temporal boundaries requires further investigation. Recent discoveries of early inscriptions at sites such as San Bartolo in Guatemala suggest that writing development occurred simultaneously across multiple regions rather than spreading from a single source. The ceramic vessels that display painted or incised symbols provide additional evidence for Olmec symbolic communication systems, though the interpretation of these markings remains challenging due to their fragmentary nature and lack of clear contextual associations. Certain recurring symbol combinations appear on vessels from different sites and time periods, suggesting standardized meanings that were understood across Olmec territory. These symbols include crosshatch patterns, step designs, and stylized animal forms that may have indicated ownership, contents, or ritual significance. Astronomical observations conducted by Olmec specialists provided the foundation for calendrical systems that would become fundamental to Mesoamerican intellectual traditions. While direct evidence for Olmec astronomical knowledge remains limited compared to later Maya and Central Mexican traditions, architectural alignments and symbolic representations suggest sophisticated understanding of celestial phenomena and their integration into religious and political activities. The architectural orientations at major Olmec sites demonstrate careful attention to astronomical alignments that connected earthly ceremonial activities to celestial events. The main axis at La Venta follows a precise north-south orientation that aligns with significant stellar phenomena, while secondary alignments correspond to solar positions at important dates in the agricultural calendar. These alignments required systematic observations conducted over extended periods by specialists who possessed detailed knowledge of celestial mechanics and their seasonal variations. The fluted pyramid at La Venta incorporates astronomical alignments that suggest its builders understood the relationship between architectural form and celestial observation. The structure's orientation and proportional relationships correspond to specific astronomical phenomena, including solar positions at equinoxes and solstices. While the distinctive fluting may have served as a massive sundial that tracks seasonal changes throughout the year, recent archaeoastronomical investigations have revealed additional alignments that connect the pyramid to stellar events that would have held significance for agricultural timing and religious ceremonies. Calendrical concepts evidenced through Olmec monuments and symbolic representations suggest the development of sophisticated timekeeping systems that integrated astronomical observations with ritual and administrative requirements. The bar and dot numerical notation that appears on several Olmec monuments represents one of the earliest examples of mathematical recording in Mesoamerica and may indicate the existence of calendrical calculations that recorded important dates and future events. Monument 6 at San Lorenzo displays numerical notations that may represent calendrical dates according to systems that would later be elaborated by Maya and other Mesoamerican cultures. The monument features bar and dot combinations that correspond to specific numerical values while incorporating iconographic elements that suggest ritual or ceremonial significance. The interpretation of these inscriptions remains controversial, but they clearly demonstrate Olmec familiarity with mathematical concepts and systematic approaches to recording numerical information. The ceramic traditions that flourished at Olmec sites demonstrate remarkable technological achievements in material science, firing techniques, and artistic execution that establish standards for pottery production throughout Mesoamerica. The distinctive white-rimmed black ceramics that characterized Olmec pottery required sophisticated understanding of firing atmospheres, temperature control, and clay preparation techniques that produced vessels of exceptional durability and aesthetic appeal. The production of white-rimmed black ceramics involved complex firing procedures that created reducing atmospheres in kiln interiors while maintaining oxidizing conditions at vessel surfaces. This technique required precise control of fuel supplies, airflow, and firing duration that could only be achieved through extensive experimentation and technical expertise. The consistency achieved in ceramic production across different sites and time periods indicates the existence of standardized procedures and training systems that transmitted technical knowledge among specialist potters. Ceramic figurine production at Olmecs sites reached extraordinary levels of artistic sophistication while demonstrating advanced modeling techniques and firing procedures. The hollow figurines that characterized later Olmec ceramic traditions required complex assembly procedures that joined separately modeled components into unified compositions without visible seam lines. These figurines, ranging from tiny pendants to life-size sculptures, display consistent anatomical proportions and iconographic details that required master craftsmen capable of working in 3 dimensions while maintaining standardized aesthetic conventions. The technical challenges involved in firing large hollow ceramics required sophisticated kiln designs and firing procedures that prevented cracking and distortion during the heating and cooling cycles. Archaeological investigations have revealed evidence for specialized firing facilities that included carefully constructed kilns with controlled ventilation systems and temperature monitoring capabilities. These installations represent significant investments in ceramic production technology that enabled the creation of objects that served both practical and ceremonial functions within Olmec society. Stone tool production at Olmec sites, while limited compared to their achievements in monumental sculpture and jade carving, demonstrates sophisticated understanding of lithic technology and raw material procurement that supported both daily activities and specialized craft production. The obsidian blade technology that characterized Olmec workshops produced some of the sharpest cutting tools ever created, with edges that exceeded the sharpness of modern surgical steel when properly manufactured by skilled knappers. The procurement and processing of obsidian from distant highland sources required systematic trade relationships and technical expertise that enabled Olmec craftsmen to work effectively with this challenging material. Archaeological evidence from obsidian workshops includes complete reduction sequences from raw nodules to finished tools, demonstrating mastery of core preparation techniques, blade removal procedures, and tool finishing methods that maximize the utility of imported raw materials. Specialized craft manufacturing at Olmec sites encompassed numerous activities beyond the well-documented traditions of stone carving and ceramic production. Textile production, evidence through spindle hurls, weaving tools, and preserved fabric impressions, indicates sophisticated understanding of fiber processing, thread production, and fabric construction techniques. The cotton textiles produced by Olmec weavers incorporated complex patterns and color combinations that required specialized dyeing techniques and advanced loom technology. Featherworking represented another specialized craft tradition that produced elaborate ceremonial costumes and ritual objects using exotic feathers obtained through long-distance trade networks. Archaeological evidence includes specialized tools for feather processing, adhesive preparations for attaching feathers to fabric backings, and preserved examples of featherwork that demonstrate extraordinary technical skill and artistic sophistication. These objects served important functions in religious ceremonies and political displays that required craftsmen capable of creating objects worthy of divine beings and elite patrons. The technological innovations and craft specializations that defined Olmec civilization emerged from a complex social framework that organized thousands of individuals into hierarchical communities capable of supporting monumental construction projects, long-distance trade networks, and sophisticated religious institutions. Archaeological evidence from residential areas, burial contexts, and workshop facilities reveals a stratified society where specialized roles, inherited status, and controlled access to resources shaped every aspect of daily existence from birth to death. The hierarchical structure of Olmec society becomes clearly visible through systematic analysis of residential architecture, burial practices, and artifact distributions that demonstrate pronounced differences in wealth, status, and access to luxury goods. At the apex of this social pyramid stood ruler-priests who combined political authority with religious leadership, residing in elaborate compounds that occupied the most prominent locations within ceremonial centers, while commanding resources that enabled them to sponsor massive construction projects and maintain extensive trade relationships. Elite residential complexes at San Lorenzo and La Venta featured architectural elements that distinguished them dramatically from ordinary domestic structures. These compounds typically encompassed multiple buildings arranged around private courtyards, with the primary residences elevated on stone platforms that raised them 2 to 4 meters above surrounding ground levels. The main structures incorporated sophisticated drainage systems with stone-lined channels that carried rainwater away from living areas, while preventing flooding during the intense tropical storms that regularly swept across the Gulf Coast lowlands. The construction techniques employed in elite architecture required access to specialized materials and skilled craftsmen that were unavailable to ordinary community members. Foundation walls built from carefully dressed basalt blocks, weighing several tons each, demonstrated the ability to mobilize large labor forces for private construction projects, while interior features included plastered floors with multiple layers of colored clay, built-in storage benches, and raised sleeping platforms that provided comfort and status display. The roofing systems employed wooden beams capable of spanning large interior spaces without intermediate supports, creating impressive reception areas suitable for hosting important visitors and conducting political business. Archaeological investigations within elite residential areas have revealed specialized activity zones that indicate the diverse functions performed within these compounds. Formal reception areas featured elaborate floor treatments and architectural embellishments that provided appropriate settings for diplomatic meetings and ceremonial activities, while private family quarters included smaller rooms with more modest, decorative programs that served as sleeping and personal storage areas. Workshop spaces within elite compounds contained evidence for luxury craft production, including jade carving, fine ceramic manufacture, and textile weaving that produced objects for personal use and gift exchange. The material culture associated with elite residences demonstrates access to exotic goods and specialized services that reflected their occupants' position within regional exchange networks. Imported obsidian tools from highland Mexican sources, jade ornaments from Guatemalan quarries, and marine shells from both Pacific and Atlantic coasts appear regularly in elite contexts while remaining rare or absent in ordinary residential areas. The presence of these materials in domestic refuse deposits indicates that elite families incorporated luxury goods into their daily routines rather than reserving them exclusively for ceremonial occasions. Specialized craftsmen occupied an intermediate position within Olmec social hierarchy, possessing technical skills that made them valuable to elite patrons while maintaining higher status than ordinary farmers and laborers. Archaeological evidence from workshop areas reveals distinct residential zones where craft specialists lived in modest but well-constructed houses that reflected their important economic roles without approaching the grandeur of elite compounds. These craftsmen's residences typically featured stone foundations, carefully constructed drainage systems, and specialized work areas that accommodated the requirements of different manufacturing activities. The jade carving workshops that operated at major Olmec centers required master craftsmen who had undergone years of training to develop the technical skills necessary for working this extremely hard material. Archaeological deposits from these workshops contain evidence for the complete production sequence from raw material processing to finished ornament creation, including jade debitage, partially completed objects, and specialized tools used for cutting, drilling, and polishing operations. The presence of jade materials from multiple geographic sources indicates that these craftsmen served as processing centers where raw materials from distant regions were transformed into finished goods for local use and long-distance trade. Ceramic workshops at Olmecs sites produced both utilitarian vessels for daily use and elaborate ceremonial objects that required sophisticated technical knowledge and artistic skills. The potters who created the distinctive white-rimmed black ceramics that characterized Olmec material culture possessed specialized understanding of clay preparation, firing techniques, and surface treatments that enabled them to achieve consistent results across large production runs. Archaeological evidence from these workshops includes pottery kilns, clay preparation areas, and tool assemblages that reveal standardized production procedures and quality control measures. The figurine specialist who created the remarkable ceramic sculptures found throughout Olmec territory represented a distinct craft tradition that combined technical expertise with detailed knowledge of religious iconography and artistic conventions. These craftsmen produced objects ranging from tiny pendants measuring only a few centimeters to the life-sized hollow sculptures that required complex assembly procedures and sophisticated firing techniques. The consistency of iconographic details across figurines from different sites indicates that these specialists worked according to established artistic traditions that were transmitted through formal training programs. Stone tool manufacturers at Olmec sites processed imported raw materials, including obsidian from highland Mexican sources and chert from regional deposits to produce both everyday implements and specialized ceremonial objects. The obsidian workshops demonstrate mastery of core preparation techniques and blade removal procedures that maximize the utility of this valuable imported material. Archaeological evidence includes complete reduction sequences that reveal systematic approaches to tool production, designed to minimize waste while ensuring consistent quality and performance. Merchants and traders formed another specialized group within Olmec society, responsible for maintaining the long-distance exchange networks that supplied raw materials for craft production while distributing finished goods throughout Mesoamerica. These individuals possessed detailed knowledge of travel routes, market conditions, and diplomatic relationships that enabled them to operate effectively across diverse cultural and linguistic boundaries. Archaeological evidence from merchant activities includes specialized storage facilities, transportation equipment, and concentrations of exotic materials that indicate the scale and complexity of commercial operations. The residential areas associated with merchant activities typically featured large storage facilities and workshop spaces where imported raw materials could be processed and finished goods prepared for redistribution. These compounds often contained materials from multiple geographic sources, reflecting the diverse trade relationships maintained by their occupants. The presence of scales, measuring devices, and standardized containers suggests that these merchants operated according to systematic procedures for evaluating and exchanging different types of goods. Agricultural specialists who managed the complex raised field systems and irrigation networks that supported Olmec populations represented another important occupational group within the social hierarchy. These individuals possessed technical knowledge of soil management, water control, and crop cultivation that enabled them to maintain agricultural productivity levels capable of supporting dense populations in challenging wetland environments. Archaeological evidence from agricultural areas includes specialized tools, field management facilities, and residential compounds that reflect the important economic roles performed by these specialists. The farmers who worked the raised field systems lived in modest but well-constructed houses located near their agricultural plots, with architectural features adapted to the requirements of wetland environments. These residences typically featured elevated foundations that protected against seasonal flooding, while incorporating storage facilities for agricultural tools and harvested crops. The material culture associated with agricultural specialists includes specialized implements for field construction and maintenance, crop processing equipment, and ceramic vessels designed for food storage and preparation. Laborers and service workers occupied the lowest levels of Olmec social hierarchy, performing the manual tasks required for construction projects, agricultural production, and basic maintenance activities that supported the complex civilization. Archaeological evidence for these populations comes primarily from simple residential structures located on the peripheries of major centers, where they lived in small houses constructed from perishable materials that left minimal archaeological traces. The residential architecture associated with labor populations consisted primarily of pole and thatch structures built on low-earth platforms that provided minimal protection against flooding, while requiring limited investment in construction materials and labor. These houses typically measured 4 to 6 meters in length and contained single rooms that served multiple functions including sleeping, food preparation, and storage. The material culture associated with these residences includes basic ceramic vessels, simple stone tools, and limited quantities of imported materials that reflect restricted access to luxury goods and specialized services. Gender roles within Olmec society can be partially reconstructed through analysis of figurines, burial practices, and artistic representations that provide insights into the activities and status positions of men and women within different social contexts. Ceramic figurines from Olmec sites include representations of both male and female individuals engaged in various activities, though the interpretation of these objects remains challenging due to their often supernatural characteristics and symbolic functions. Female figurines from Olmec contexts frequently display elaborate hairstyles, body ornaments, and clothing that suggest important social roles and high-status positions within community hierarchies. Some female figurines wear distinctive headdresses and carry objects that may indicate ritual or administrative functions, while others display characteristics associated with fertility and reproduction that connect them to fundamental religious concepts. The technical quality and artistic sophistication of many female figurines indicates that women held positions of sufficient importance to warrant commemoration in permanent artistic media. Male figurines typically display different attributes, including distinctive costume elements, ritual implements, and body modifications that suggest their roles as rulers, priests, or specialized craftsmen. The colossal heads that represent the most famous examples of Olmec sculpture exclusively depict male individuals, indicating that political leadership roles were primarily occupied by men during this period. However, the presence of elaborate female burials and artistic representations suggests that women could achieve high status through other means, including religious specialization and kinship relationships. Burial practices at Olmec sites reveal significant variations in treatment that reflect both social status and gender differences within community hierarchies. Elite burials typically featured elaborate grave goods, specially constructed tomb chambers, and careful body positioning that emphasized the deceased individual's importance within community social structures. These burials often included complete jade regalia, imported ceramic vessels, obsidian tools, and other luxury goods that demonstrated the deceased's access to valuable resources and specialized services. The most elaborate burials discovered at Olmecs sites include individuals interred with extraordinary assemblages of jade ornaments that represent some of the finest examples of ancient American lapidary arts. Tombs at La Venta contained an individual wearing a jade mosaic mask composed of over 200 individual pieces that had been carefully shaped and fitted together to create a supernatural face with Jaguar characteristics. The technical precision required to create this mask represents months of patient work by master craftsmen. While the jade materials originated from sources over 1,000 kilometers away in Guatemala. Gender differences in burial practices become apparent through analysis of grave good assemblages and body treatment procedures that suggest distinct roles and status markers for men and women within Olmec society. Male elite burials typically include jade ceremonial axes, obsidian bloodletting implements, and other objects associated with ritual and political authority, while female elite burials often feature elaborate jewelry, textile implements, and ceramic vessels that may indicate different spheres of influence and responsibility. Family organization within Olmec society appears to have been based on extended kinship groups that maintained residential compounds and shared economic activities across multiple generations. Archaeological evidence from residential areas suggests that related families occupied adjacent structures within larger compounds, sharing courtyard spaces and specialized facilities, while maintaining separate domestic areas for individual nuclear families. This pattern indicates social organization based on kinship relationships that provided economic security and political support for community members. The residential compounds that housed extended families typically featured multiple structures arranged around shared courtyards that served as work areas and social spaces where different family members could interact while pursuing individual activities. These courtyards often contained specialized facilities including food preparation areas, craft workshops, and storage facilities that served the needs of entire kinship groups. The architectural arrangement of these compounds suggests that family organization emphasized cooperation and resource sharing while maintaining distinct spaces for different household units. Daily life activities within Olmec communities revolved around the basic requirements of food production, craft manufacture, and social interaction that sustained these complex societies in challenging tropical environments. Food preparation represented a major focus of daily activity, requiring specialized knowledge and equipment for processing the diverse crops cultivated in raised field systems and wetland environments. Archaeological evidence includes numerous grinding stones, cooking vessels, and food storage facilities that reveal the scale and complexity of food processing activities. Maize preparation involved elaborate procedures for removing kernels from cobs, grinding grain into flour using stone metates, and cooking the resulting meal into tortillas, gruels, and other food forms that provided dietary staples for Olmec populations. The next demalization process, which involved treating corn with lime to improve its nutritional content and storage properties, required specialized knowledge and equipment that enabled Olmec populations to maximize the value of their agricultural production. Archaeological evidence includes lime processing facilities, specialized cooking vessels, and storage containers that reveal the sophistication of food preparation techniques. Textile production represented another major component of daily life activities, with evidence suggesting that both cotton and other plant fibers were processed into clothing, ceremonial regalia, and utilitarian objects that served diverse functions within Olmec society. Spindle whorls recovered from residential contexts indicate that thread production occurred within individual households, while specialized weaving tools suggest that fabric manufacture required technical skills and equipment that may have been controlled by specialized craftsmen. The textile production process began with fiber preparation activities that involved cleaning, combing, and preparing plant materials for spinning into thread using wooden spindles weighted with ceramic whorls. Archaeological evidence includes numerous spindle whorls displaying different sizes and decorative treatments that suggest specialized tools for processing different types of fibers and producing threads with varying characteristics. The weaving process required sophisticated loom technology and technical knowledge that enabled craftsmen to create complex patterns and fabric structures suitable for different uses. Domestic architecture associated with ordinary households reveals adaptation to the challenging environmental conditions of the tropical lowlands, while providing adequate shelter and workspace for family activities. These structures typically featured raised floors that protected against seasonal flooding, thatched roofs designed to shed heavy rainfall, and open wall systems that provided ventilation during hot, humid weather conditions. The construction techniques employed perishable materials that required regular maintenance and replacement, but provided effective protection against environmental challenges. The interior arrangements of ordinary households included specialized areas for different activities, including food preparation, sleeping, storage, and craft production that enabled families to pursue diverse economic activities within limited residential spaces. Archaeological evidence includes hearth areas with associated cooking vessels, storage pits lined with stone or ceramic containers, and work areas with specialized tools that reveal the range of activities conducted within individual households. Population estimates for major Olmec centers suggest that these communities supported several thousand residents during their periods of maximum development, with San Lorenzo reaching approximately 5,500 inhabitants and La Venta supporting around 18,000 people at their respective peaks. These population levels required sophisticated organizational systems and resource management strategies that could coordinate the activities of large numbers of individuals while maintaining social stability and economic productivity. Settlement patterns within Olmec territory reveal a hierarchical arrangement of communities that included major ceremonial centers, secondary administrative sites, and dispersed rural settlements that supported agricultural production and resource extraction activities. The major centers served as political and religious focal points that coordinated activities across extensive territories, while smaller communities provided specialized services and raw materials that supported the complex economic systems that characterized Olmec civilization. The dispersed rural communities that surrounded major Olmec centers typically consisted of small clusters of residential structures located near agricultural fields or resource extraction areas. These settlements provided food surpluses, raw materials, and specialized products that supported the populations of larger centers, while maintaining their own community identities and local leadership structures. Archaeological surveys have revealed hundreds of these smaller sites distributed throughout Olmec territory, indicating settlement densities that suggest regional populations numbering in the tens of thousands. The integration of nucleated centers with dispersed rural communities required transportation and communication systems that could coordinate economic activities across extensive territories, while maintaining political control and social cohesion. The canal networks and raised causeways that connected different areas served both practical and symbolic functions, facilitating the movement of people and goods while demonstrating the organizational capabilities of Olmec rulers and their administrative systems. The sophisticated transportation networks and communication systems that had sustained Olmec civilization for over a millennium began showing signs of 400 BC as environmental pressures, internal conflicts, and shifting trade patterns converged to challenge the foundations of Gulf Coast political authority. Archaeological evidence from this transitional period reveals a complex process of decline that unfolded gradually across different regions, with some areas experiencing rapid abandonment while others maintained reduced populations and modified cultural practices for several additional centuries. Climate data reconstructed from paleoenvironmental studies indicates that the Gulf Coast lowlands experienced significant environmental changes during the late first millennium BC that disrupted the agricultural systems supporting dense populations around major ceremonial centers. Sediment cores from lake beds and coastal lagoons reveal evidence for increased volcanic activity in the Tuxtla Mountains that deposited ash layers across agricultural areas while altering local drainage patterns. The volcanic eruptions, dated through radiocarbon analysis to approximately 400 to 300 BC, created temporary lakes and redirected river courses that flooded established field systems and forced populations to relocate to higher ground. The raised field complexes that had sustained Olmec agricultural productivity for centuries became increasingly difficult to maintain as changing precipitation patterns and river behavior altered the delicate water management systems that enabled intensive cultivation in wetland environments. Archaeological investigations at field sites near San Lorenzo reveal evidence for hasty abandonment around 350 BC, with agricultural tools left scattered across planting surfaces and maintenance work left incomplete on drainage channels. Soil samples from these abandoned fields show elevated levels of volcanic ash and altered chemical compositions that would have reduced crop yields and made continued cultivation economically unfeasible. River system modifications caused by both natural processes and human activities created additional challenges for communities dependent on waterborne transportation and trade relationships. The cuts of Colcos River, which had served as the primary commercial artery connecting Olmec centers to highland sources of obsidian and other raw materials, underwent channel changes that created new sandbars and navigation hazards. Archaeological evidence from riverside settlements indicates that many communities relocated away from traditional river ports during this period, abandoning elaborate dock facilities and warehouse complexes that had supported commercial activities for centuries. The disruption of agricultural systems and transportation networks created cascading effects throughout Olmec society that undermined the economic foundations supporting specialized craft production and monumental construction projects. Workshop areas at major centers show evidence for reduced activity levels and simplified production procedures that suggest declining access to raw materials and skilled craftsmen. Jade carving workshops at La Venta contain deposits indicating that work ceased abruptly around 350 BC, with partially completed ornaments abandoned alongside specialized tools and raw materials that would have represented significant investments under normal circumstances. Internal conflicts within Olmec society appear to have intensified during this period of stress. As competing elite factions struggle to maintain control over diminishing resources and populations, archaeological evidence for violence and social disruption includes deliberate destruction of monuments, defensive modifications to residential compounds, and mass burial sites that suggest periodic episodes of warfare or civil unrest. The careful defacement of several colossal heads at San Lorenzo indicates systematic efforts to eliminate symbols of particular rulers or dynasties, while the hasty burial of valuable objects suggests that elite families fled their residences under threatening circumstances. Monument destruction at Olmec sites followed patterns that suggest organized campaigns rather than random vandalism or natural deterioration. The colossal heads at San Lorenzo were systematically buried in specially excavated pits along with other monumental sculptures, creating what archaeologists have termed monument cemeteries that appear to represent ritual termination ceremonies rather than simple disposal activities. The careful positioning of these sculptures within their burial contexts, often accompanied by offerings of jade objects and ceramic vessels, indicates that their interment followed established religious protocols, even as political authority collapsed. The defensive earthworks constructed around residential areas at several Olmec sites during this period provide direct evidence for increased warfare and social instability. Archaeological investigations at La Venta have revealed a system of ditches and embankments that enclose the ceremonial core and elite residential areas, creating fortified zones that could be defended against attacking forces. The construction of these defensive features required substantial labor investments that would have diverted resources from other activities, indicating that security concerns had become paramount for surviving populations. Population dispersal from traditional heartland areas accelerated during the 3rd and 2nd centuries BC as environmental degradation and social conflicts made continued residence at major centers increasingly difficult. Archaeological surveys throughout Olmec territory reveal evidence for the establishment of new settlements in previously unoccupied areas, including highland valleys and coastal zones that offered different resource bases and environmental conditions. These new communities typically featured simplified architectural forms and reduced material culture assemblages that suggest adaptation to circumstances with limited resources and technical capabilities. The abandonment process at major Olmec centers followed different patterns that reflect varying local conditions and community responses to changing circumstances. San Lorenzo experienced relatively rapid depopulation between 300 and 5300 BC, with most residential areas showing evidence for hasty abandonment and minimal efforts to preserve valuable objects or architectural features. Archaeological deposits from this period contain scattered household goods, broken pottery, and other debris that suggests residents departed quickly without time for careful packing or systematic site closure procedures. La Venta's decline occurred more gradually over a period extending from 400 to 100 BC, with evidence suggesting that reduced populations continued to occupy portions of the site while maintaining simplified versions of traditional ceremonial activities. Archaeological investigations have revealed that certain platform areas continued to receive offerings and maintenance attention even as other portions of the site were abandoned to vegetation growth and structural decay. This pattern indicates that core religious functions persisted even as the political and economic systems that had sustained the site's earlier grandeur collapsed. The continuation of Olmec cultural traditions in peripheral regions demonstrates the resilience of fundamental concepts and practices that had been established during the civilization's fluorescence. Communities located along the margins of traditional Olmec territory maintained modified versions of characteristic artistic styles, religious practices, and technological traditions, while adapting them to local conditions and reduced resource availability. Archaeological evidence from sites in Chiapas, Oaxaca, and central Mexico reveals the persistence of Huarjagua iconography, jade carving traditions, and ceremonial architecture that clearly derived from Olmec prototypes. Regional variations in cultural continuity reflect different degrees of contact with Olmec heartland populations and varying local conditions that influence the adoption and modification of traditional practices. Communities with strong trade relationships to Olmec centers maintained more elaborate versions of traditional cultural forms, while isolated populations developed simplified adaptations that retained essential symbolic elements while eliminating complex technical requirements. The jade carving traditions that continued in highland Oaxaca, for example, employed local serpentine and other readily available materials to create objects that maintained characteristic Olmec iconographic elements while adapting to different raw material properties. The integration of Olmec cultural elements into emerging regional traditions created hybrid cultural forms that combine traditional concepts with local innovations and environmental adaptations. The Zapotec civilization that developed in the Oaxaca Valley during this period incorporated Olmec-derived writing systems, calendrical concepts, and religious iconography, while developing distinctive architectural styles and political organizations adapted to highland conditions. Archaeological evidence from Monte Alban and other early Zapotec centers reveals clear connections to Olmec traditions alongside innovations that reflect independent cultural development. Artistic traditions that had originated in Olmec contexts underwent significant transformations as they were adopted by different cultural groups across Mesoamerica. There were jaguar motifs that had been central to Olmec religious iconography, appeared in modified forms throughout Mexico and Central America, often combined with local supernatural concepts and artistic conventions to create new symbolic complexes. Maya artistic traditions that emerged during the late 1st millennium BC incorporated Olmec-derived elements including supernatural transformation themes, elite portraiture conventions, and ceremonial regalia designs while developing distinctive stylistic characteristics and iconographic programs. The technological innovations that had characterized Olmec civilization continued to influence cultural development throughout Mesoamerica, even as the political entities that had created them disappeared. Hydraulic engineering techniques developed for managing wetland environments were adapted for use in highland valleys and coastal plains, while agricultural intensification methods spread throughout regions where growing populations required increased food production. The raised field systems that had sustained Olmec populations were modified for use in the Maya lowlands, the Valley of Mexico, and other areas where environmental conditions permitted similar approaches to agricultural management. Ceramic production techniques that had reached sophisticated levels at Olmec centers influenced pottery traditions throughout Mesoamerica, as displaced craftsmen established workshops in new locations and trained local artisans in specialized procedures. The distinctive firing techniques used to create white-rimmed black ceramics appeared in modified forms at sites throughout central and southern Mexico, while figurine production traditions continued at numerous locations with adaptations that reflected local materials and cultural preferences. Archaeological evidence indicates that technical knowledge was actively transmitted through networks of itinerant craftsmen who maintained connections between different regional traditions. Stoneworking traditions established at Olmec centers provided foundations for the monumental sculpture programs that would characterize later Mesoamerican civilizations. The techniques developed for quarrying, transporting, and carving massive basalt blocks were adapted for use with different materials and architectural contexts throughout the region. Maya sculptors employed similar methods for working limestone, while Zapotec craftsmen applied related techniques to local stone varieties available in highland environments. The organizational systems required for coordinating large-scale stoneworking projects were transmitted along with technical knowledge, enabling later civilizations to undertake monumental construction programs that rivaled or exceeded Olmec achievements. Religious concepts that had been fundamental to Olmec spiritual life underwent transformation and elaboration as they were incorporated into cultural contexts throughout Mesoamerica. The shamanic traditions that had characterized Olmec religious practices provided foundations for priestly hierarchies and ritual systems that would define later civilizations. Bloodletting ceremonies, supernatural transformation concepts, and cosmic symbolism that had originated in Olmec contexts appeared in modified forms among Maya, Zapotec, and Central Mexican populations, while being adapted to local theological concepts and ceremonial requirements. Calendrical systems that had been developed by Olmec priest astronomers provided the mathematical and observational foundations for the elaborate timekeeping systems that would become central to Mesoamerican intellectual traditions. The bar and dot numerical notation, 260-day ritual calendar, and long count dating system that first appeared in Olmec contexts were refined and elaborated by subsequent civilizations while maintaining their essential structural characteristics. Archaeological evidence from sites throughout Mesoamerica reveals the gradual spread and modification of these calendrical concepts during the centuries following Olmec political decline. Trade networks that had been established during the height of Olmec power continued to operate under modified circumstances as local populations maintained commercial relationships that had been developed over centuries of interaction. The obsidian trade routes that had connected highland Mexican sources to Gulf Coast centers were redirected to serve emerging regional powers, while jade procurement operations in Guatemala adapted to serve new markets and political arrangements. Archaeological evidence indicates that commercial activities continued at reduced levels throughout the transition period, maintaining connections between distant regions while adapting to changed political circumstances. The merchant communities that had facilitated long-distance trade during the Olmec period adapted to new circumstances by establishing relationships with emerging regional powers and developing new trade routes that bypassed traditional Olmec centers. Archaeological evidence from merchant settlements reveals continuity in commercial practices and material culture assemblages, while showing adaptations to changed political and economic conditions. These communities served as crucial links in maintaining cultural and technological exchange between different regions during the transition period. Settlement patterns throughout former Olmec territory underwent significant reorganization as populations relocated from traditional centers to new locations that offered better access to resources and trade opportunities. Archaeological surveys reveal the establishment of numerous small communities in previously unoccupied areas, often located near resource extraction sites or along new transportation routes that connected emerging regional centers. These settlements typically featured simplified versions of traditional Olmec architectural forms, while incorporating innovations adapted to local environmental conditions. The political fragmentation that accompanied Olmec decline created opportunities for local leaders to establish independent power bases while maintaining connections to traditional cultural forms and practices. Archaeological evidence from several sites reveals the emergence of regional elite groups that sponsored construction projects and craft production activities on scales that were modest compared to earlier Olmec achievements, but significant within their local contexts. These leaders typically employed traditional symbols of authority while adapting them to new political circumstances and resource constraints. Cultural synthesis processes that occurred during this transition period created new traditions that combined Olmec-derived elements with local innovations and foreign influences from other regions of Mesoamerica. The AP-Olmec culture that emerged in the Isthmus of Tehuantepec during the 2nd and 1st centuries BC represents one example of this synthetic process, maintaining clear connections to traditional Olmec iconography and religious practices while incorporating writing systems and calendrical concepts that showed influences from Maya and Zapotec developments. Archaeological evidence from trace zapotes and other AP-Olmec sites reveals communities that maintained simplified versions of traditional ceremonial architecture while developing new forms of artistic expression and political organization. The monuments erected at these sites employed traditional Olmec sculptural techniques and iconographic elements while incorporating textual inscriptions that recorded historical events and calendrical information according to systems that showed clear connections to later Maya and Central Mexican traditions. The transformation of Olmec civilization during this period represents a complex process of cultural change that involved both decline and innovation as traditional institutions adapted to new circumstances, while fundamental concepts and practices were transmitted to emerging regional cultures. Rather than representing simple collapse or abandonment, this transition period witnessed the creative adaptation and transformation of Olmec achievements that would provide foundations for the complex civilizations that would dominate Mesoamerica during subsequent centuries. The innovations in agriculture, technology, art, and social organization that had characterized Olmec civilization continued to influence cultural development throughout the region while being modified and elaborated according to local conditions and cultural preferences. The creative adaptation and transformation of Olmec achievements that had provided foundations for emerging Mesoamerican civilizations established patterns of cultural transmission that would influence the region's development for over 2 millennia after the decline of the great Gulf Coast centers. Archaeological evidence demonstrates that fundamental innovations in agriculture, urban planning, religious symbolism, and technological production developed by Olmec populations spread throughout Mexico and Central America through complex networks of trade, migration, and cultural exchange that created lasting connections between distant regions and diverse populations. The agricultural systems pioneered by Olmec engineers provided templates for intensive cultivation techniques that enabled later civilizations to support dense populations in challenging environments throughout Mesoamerica. The raised field complexes that had sustained Gulf Coast communities were adapted for use in the Maya lowlands, where similar wetland management techniques supported the great cities of Tikal, Calakmul, and Caracol during the Classic period. Archaeological investigations in the Candelaria River basin of Campeche have revealed extensive raised field systems covering over 200 square kilometers that employed construction techniques and water management principles directly derived from Olmec prototypes developed centuries earlier in Veracruz and Tabasco. Maya engineers modified these agricultural innovations to address the specific challenges of limestone karst environments where surface water was scarce and soil depths were limited. The Bajo systems that supported Maya urban centers incorporated Olmec-derived drainage techniques with local innovations, including limestone-lined channels and sophisticated water storage facilities that captured and conserved seasonal rainfall. Recent LiDAR surveys have revealed that these agricultural landscapes supported population densities approaching 1,000 people per sq.km in some areas, demonstrating the effectiveness of techniques that originated in Olmec contexts. The Chinampas agriculture that would later characterize the Valley of Mexico shows equally clear connections to Olmec raised field systems, though adapted to the specific conditions of highland lake environments. Archaeological investigations at Xochimilco have revealed that the earliest Chinampa construction employed building techniques and crop rotation systems that closely parallel those documented at Olmec sites, suggesting direct transmission of technical knowledge through networks of agricultural specialists who maintained connections across vast geographic distances. Urban planning concepts developed at San Lorenzo and La Venta influenced the design of ceremonial centers throughout Mesoamerica, as later civilizations adopted and modified architectural arrangements that integrated practical functions with religious symbolism. The precise astronomical alignments that characterized Olmec ceremonial architecture appear in modified forms at sites ranging from Monte Alban in Oaxaca to Teotihuacan in central Mexico, where builders employed similar surveying techniques and mathematical calculations to orient major structures according to celestial phenomena. The ceremonial plaza arrangements that defined Olmec urban cores provided organizational templates for later Mesoamerican cities that required spaces for public gatherings, religious ceremonies, and political displays. The Great Plaza at Monte Alban, constructed during the early centuries of the Common Era, employed spatial relationships and architectural proportions that clearly derived from Olmec prototypes, while incorporating Zapotec innovations adapted to highland topography and local building materials. Archaeological evidence indicates that Zapotec architects possessed detailed knowledge of Olmec planning principles, suggesting sustained contact between highland populations and Gulf Coast cultural traditions. The pyramid forms that dominated Mesoamerican ceremonial architecture throughout the Classic and post-Classic periods show clear evolutionary connections to the innovative structures erected at Olmec centers. The fluted pyramid at La Venta provided a prototype for the distinctive architectural forms that would characterize later Maya, Zapotec, and Central Mexican building traditions. The Pyramid of the Sun at Teotihuacan, constructed between 100 to 200 AD, employed construction techniques and proportional relationships that demonstrate clear knowledge of Olmec engineering principles while adapting them to create structures of unprecedented scale and complexity. Religious iconography that originated in Olmec contexts underwent continuous elaboration and regional adaptation throughout Mesoamerican cultural history, while maintaining recognizable connections to fundamental concepts developed during the first millennium BC. The Huerjaguar transformation themes that had been central to Olmec spiritual beliefs appeared in modified forms among Maya, Zapotec, and Central Mexican populations, often combined with local supernatural concepts to create new mythological complexes that retained essential elements of shamanic transformation and elite spiritual authority. Maya religious art incorporated Olmec-derived transformation imagery into elaborate mythological narratives that depicted rulers and priests assuming supernatural characteristics through ritual performance and divine intervention. The jaguar transformation scenes that appear on classic Maya ceramics and architectural sculpture employ iconographic conventions and compositional principles that clearly derive from Olmec prototypes while incorporating distinctively Maya theological concepts and artistic innovations. Archaeological evidence from sites such as San Bartolo in Guatemala reveals that these synthetic traditions emerged during the late 1st millennium BC through direct contact between Maya populations and communities that maintained Olmec cultural traditions. The feathered serpent deity that would become central to later Mesoamerican religious traditions shows clear connections to supernatural beings that first appeared in Olmec artistic contexts. The serpent imagery that characterized Olmec religious iconography provided foundational concepts for the Kukulkan-Quetzalcoatl complex that would dominate Maya and Central Mexican theology for over a millennium. Archaeological investigations at Teotihuacan have revealed that the earliest representations of feathered serpent deities employed artistic conventions and symbolic elements that demonstrate direct continuity with Olmec supernatural iconography. Calendrical systems that had been developed by Olmec priest astronomers provided the mathematical and observational foundations for the sophisticated timekeeping traditions that would define later Mesoamerican intellectual achievements. The bar and dot numerical notation that first appeared on Olmec monuments became the standard mathematical recording system throughout Mesoamerica, employed by Maya, Zapotec, and Central Mexican civilizations for recording dates, quantities, and astronomical calculations. The consistency of this numerical system across diverse cultural and linguistic boundaries demonstrates the fundamental importance of Olmec mathematical innovations. The long count calendar system that enabled Maya astronomers to record historical dates and predict astronomical events employed computational methods and observational techniques that originated in Olmec contexts during the first millennium BC. Recent epigraphic research has revealed that the earliest long count inscriptions, from sites such as Chiapa de Corzo and Trasopotes, employed calendrical concepts and mathematical procedures that provided direct foundations for later Maya chronological systems. The sophistication of these early calendrical records indicates that Olmec populations had advanced astronomical knowledge that would influence Mesoamerican intellectual traditions for centuries. Writing systems that emerged throughout Mesoamerica during the late first millennium BC and early centuries of the Common Era show varying degrees of connection to symbolic conventions that had been established in Olmec contexts. While the extent of direct influence remains debated among scholars, the iconographic elements and compositional principles that characterized early Mesoamerican scripts clearly incorporated concepts that had originated in Olmec artistic traditions. The relationship between Olmec symbolic systems and later writing development represents one of the most complex and controversial aspects of cultural transmission in ancient Mesoamerica. Maya hieroglyphic writing, the most fully developed script in ancient America, employed logographic and syllabic principles that may have been influenced by earlier Olmec symbolic systems, though the specific mechanisms of transmission remain unclear. Recent discoveries at sites such as San Bartolo and Sultan have revealed early Maya texts that incorporate iconographic elements clearly derived from Olmec artistic traditions, while employing linguistic principles adapted to Maya languages. The integration of these different symbolic systems suggests complex processes of cultural synthesis that occurred over several centuries of contact and exchange. Zapotec writing systems that emerged at Monte Alban during the late first millennium BC employed glyphic conventions and numerical notations that show clear connections to Olmec prototypes, while incorporating innovations adapted to record Zapotec language and cultural concepts. The earliest Zapotec inscriptions employ bar and dot numerals and calendrical notations that demonstrate direct continuity with Olmec mathematical traditions, while incorporating distinctive glyphic elements that reflect independent development of specific writing conventions. Technological innovations that had characterized Olmec craft production continued to influence manufacturing traditions throughout Mesoamerica, as displaced artisans established workshops in new locations and transmitted specialized knowledge to local populations. Jade carving developed by Olmec craftsmen provided foundations for lapidary traditions that would flourish among Maya, Zapotec, and Central Mexican populations, while being adapted to work with different materials and serve new cultural functions. Maya jade carving workshops at sites such as Cancun and Guatemala employed cutting, drilling, and polishing techniques that clearly derived from Olmec prototypes, while incorporating innovations that enabled the creation of objects with unprecedented technical sophistication and artistic complexity. Archaeological investigations at these workshops have revealed evidence for complete production sequences that demonstrate mastery of techniques originally developed by Olmec craftsmen, while showing adaptations that reflect centuries of technical refinement and cultural evolution. The obsidian blade technology that had reached sophisticated levels at Olmec centers influenced stone tool production throughout Mesoamerica, as technical knowledge spread through networks of itinerant craftsmen and commercial relationships. Maya obsidian workshops at sites such as Calhar in Belize produced prismatic blades using core preparation and knapping techniques that showed clear connections to methods developed at Olmec centers, while incorporating innovations that maximize the efficiency of raw material utilization and tool production. Ceramic production techniques that had been perfected by Olmec potters provided foundations for pottery traditions that would characterize later Mesoamerican civilizations, while being adapted to local materials and cultural preferences. The firing methods used to create distinctive Olmec ceramic styles influenced pottery production throughout Mexico and Central America, with regional workshops developing variations that maintained essential technical principles while incorporating local innovations and decorative preferences. Modern archaeological discoveries continue to reveal new aspects of Olmec civilization, while correcting earlier misconceptions about their cultural development and historical significance. Recent excavations at sites such as El Manate in Veracruz have uncovered extraordinary assemblages of organic materials that provide unprecedented insights into Olmec practices and technological capabilities. The waterlogged conditions at El Manate preserved wooden sculptures, rubber balls, and textile fragments that had not survived at other sites, revealing aspects of Olmec material culture that had been previously unknown. The wooden sculptures recovered from El Manate demonstrate sophisticated carving techniques and artistic traditions that complemented the better-known stone sculpture traditions. These objects, dating to the early Olmec period around 1200 BC, include human figures, supernatural beings, and abstract forms that employed iconographic conventions consistent with contemporary stone sculptures, while showing adaptations to the working properties of wood. The preservation of these organic materials has revolutionized understanding of Olmec artistic traditions and technological capabilities. Recent LiDAR surveys throughout former Olmec territory have revealed extensive settlement patterns and landscape modifications that demonstrate the true scale and complexity of Olmec civilization. These remote sensing techniques have identified hundreds of previously unknown sites, including residential areas, agricultural facilities, and ceremonial centers that indicate regional populations far exceeding earlier estimates. The settlement densities revealed through LiDAR analysis suggest that Olmec civilization supported populations numbering in the hundreds of thousands across their territorial extent. Underwater archaeology in the Gulf of Mexico has begun revealing coastal settlements and harbor facilities that had been submerged by rising sea levels since the Olmec period. These investigations have uncovered evidence for sophisticated maritime technologies and coastal trade networks that connected Olmec centers to Caribbean and Central American populations through sea routes that complemented overland trade relationships. The discovery of Olmec artifacts in underwater contexts has provided new evidence for the geographic extent of their commercial and cultural influence. Advances in chemical analysis and materials science have enabled researchers to trace the sources of raw materials used in Olmec craft production with unprecedented precision, revealing the true extent of their trade networks and resource procurement systems. Neutron activation analysis of Olmec ceramics has identified clay sources used by potters at different sites, demonstrating patterns of production and distribution that reflect complex economic relationships within and beyond the Olmec heartland. Isotopic analysis of jade objects from Olmec contexts has confirmed that raw materials originated from specific geological sources in Guatemala, while revealing previously unknown procurement routes and processing centers. These studies have demonstrated that Olmec jade carving workshops processed materials from multiple sources while maintaining quality standards that require detailed knowledge of different jade varieties and their working properties. Contemporary significance of Olmec heritage for modern Mexican identity reflects growing recognition of their fundamental contributions to Mesoamerican civilization and their role as cultural ancestors of contemporary indigenous populations. Educational programs and museum exhibitions throughout Mexico have emphasized Olmec achievements in art, technology, and social organization, while connecting their innovations to the cultural traditions that continue to characterize Mexican society. Indigenous communities in the Gulf Coast region maintain cultural practices and traditional knowledge that show clear connections to Olmec antecedents, though the specific mechanisms of transmission remain complex and often difficult to document. Contemporary Mix and Zoca populations, whose languages belong to the same family spoken in the Olmec heartland, preserve agricultural techniques, religious concepts, and artistic traditions that may represent continuities extending back over 2 millennia. The colossal heads and other Olmec monuments have become powerful symbols of Mexican cultural identity, representing the sophisticated achievements of indigenous populations that preceded European colonization by over a millennium. These sculptures appear on currency, government buildings, and cultural institutions throughout Mexico, while serving as focal points for discussions about indigenous rights and cultural preservation. Tourism development in Veracruz and Tabasco has created economic opportunities for local communities, while raising awareness of Olmec cultural heritage among national and international audiences. Archaeological parks at La Venta and other sites provide educational experiences that connect visitors to ancient achievements while supporting conservation efforts and community development programs. Unresolved mysteries surrounding Olmec civilization continue to challenge researchers and inspire new investigations that may reshape understanding of their cultural development and historical significance. The ultimate origins of Olmec populations remain unclear despite decades of archaeological and linguistic research that have failed to identify definitive connections to earlier cultural traditions or specific population movements that could account for their rapid emergence as a complex civilization. Recent genetic studies of ancient DNA recovered from Olmec sites have provided limited results due to poor preservation conditions in tropical environments. Though ongoing research may eventually reveal population relationships and migration patterns that contributed to Olmec cultural development. The application of new extraction and analysis techniques to archaeological materials may provide insights into the biological relationships between Olmec populations and other Mesoamerican groups. The nature of Olmec writing systems remains one of the most controversial aspects of their cultural achievements, with scholars continuing to debate whether the symbolic elements found on monuments and portable objects represent true writing or more limited forms of visual communication. Recent discoveries of early texts at sites throughout Mesoamerica have provided new comparative materials for analyzing Olmec symbolic systems while raising additional questions about the relationships between different regional traditions. The decipherment of Olmec symbols, if they do represent writing, would revolutionize understanding of their political organization, religious beliefs, and historical development while providing direct access to their own accounts of important events and cultural concepts. Ongoing epigraphic research employs computational methods and comparative analysis to identify patterns in Olmec symbolic usage that may reveal systematic linguistic principles underlying their visual communication systems. The full extent of cultural influence throughout Mesoamerica continues to be revealed through new archaeological discoveries that demonstrate connections between Gulf Coast populations and distant regions previously thought to be outside their sphere of interaction. Recent excavations in Honduras, Costa Rica, and other Central American locations have uncovered Olmec-style artifacts and architectural features that suggest their influence extended further south than previously recognized. Future research directions in Olmec studies will likely focus on interdisciplinary approaches that combine archaeological investigation with environmental science, materials analysis, and digital technologies to create a more comprehensive understanding of their cultural achievements and historical significance. Climate reconstruction studies may reveal the environmental factors that contributed to their rise and decline while providing insights into their adaptive strategies and technological innovations. The application of artificial intelligence and machine learning to analyze patterns in Olmec art and symbolic systems may reveal previously unrecognized connections and systematic principles that could advance understanding of their cultural development and intellectual achievements. These computational approaches may identify subtle patterns in iconographic usage and artistic conventions that are difficult to detect through traditional analytical methods. As archaeological research continues to expand understanding of Olmec civilization, their legacy as Mesoamerica's foundational culture becomes increasingly apparent through the countless innovations and cultural concepts they contributed to subsequent civilizations. From the raised agricultural fields that sustained Maya cities, to the calendrical systems that enabled precise astronomical observations, from the artistic traditions that inspired centuries of creative expression, to the urban planning concepts that organized complex societies, Olmec achievements provided essential foundations for the remarkable cultural development that would characterize Mesoamerica for over 2 millennia. Their transformation from a regional culture in the Gulf Coast lowlands into the intellectual and technological wellspring of an entire civilization represents one of the most significant cultural developments in human history, establishing patterns of innovation and cultural synthesis that continue to influence our understanding of ancient American achievements and their contributions to world civilization. Thank you so much for watching. See y'all in the next one video. If you like my channel, like and subscribe.